The story began with a painful, desperate scream from someone whose face was stained with blood and whose eyes clearly reflected horror and panic. This was followed by an attack from ferocious, terrifying creatures with blazing red eyes, advancing quickly and with a threatening, fearsome force. As these monstrous beings surged forward, civilians fled in every direction, screaming in panic and chaos, with fear overwhelming the entire area. Suddenly, a massive explosion occurred in the middle of the battlefield, scattering the crowds and knocking some people down from its intensity, causing visible turmoil across the battleground. After that, a powerful warrior appeared, his red eyes blazing with strength and rage, launching a crushing assault with his sword, trying to fend off the creatures and push back the attack. The warrior continued to fight fiercely, striking with his weapon and creating massive bursts of energy, driving the monsters back with tremendous force. Another intense and powerful explosion occurred, confirming the ferocity of the battle and escalating its intensity. Yet another powerful explosion caused a mighty beam of light to crash down to the earth, creating a tremendous impact on the land and its surroundings. After these events, the brave warrior stood firmly, holding his sword which radiated a mysterious and powerful energy, known as Eos, the strongest sword in the empire. Then appeared a terrifying foe, Death Knight, a dark creature clad in majestic black armor and with a fearsome presence. The Death Knight was struck by a direct attack, resulting in his mask being shattered. The Death Knight appeared visibly injured, kneeling and exhausted, but his red eye still gleamed with rage and determination despite the wounds. In a moment of shock and astonishment, the Death Knight's eyes widened as he saw something utterly shocking. The overall scene then looked like a battle that had come to an end, with flames engulfing everything, and the Death Knight panting heavily as he observed the destruction around him. Afterward, a horrifying enemy appeared, clapping with pleasure, showing delight in his success at destroying the cursed empire. This creature continued celebrating the devastation, declaring that revenge becomes sweeter the longer it is awaited. The terrifying being stood proudly and announced that he had finally fulfilled a promise made 1,000 years ago, expressing immense joy at achieving this vengeance. Finally, the true identity of the fearsome creature was revealed, Lich Dorgos, with a horrifying skeletal form and blazing red eyes. He was confronted by Emperor Horad, who shouted at him in fury for killing his people. Dorgos responded mockingly with a smile, considering the emperor's harsh words a lovely curse. Dorgos sarcastically told him that he was done speaking and that it was time for his coronation ceremony. But Emperor Horad responded by saying it was impossible for someone like him to be crowned king. Dorgos proudly declared that he had united the continent for the first time in history, claiming that he deserved the title of the new emperor. The former emperor appeared utterly defeated and exhausted, falling to his knees in clear anguish. Dorgos then praised the work of his commanders, the Demon Kings and the Death Knight, grateful for their efforts that led him to victory. He then ordered the royal crown to be brought forward for his coronation. The royal crown appeared, carried by Dorgos's followers, who stood awaiting his command. The Death Knight approached Dorgos, carrying the crown with evident loyalty. Dorgos praised the Death Knight in particular, thanking him for his loyalty and great contribution to achieving this victory, wondering how he might reward him. But the Death Knight remained silent, appearing clearly hesitant and emotionally conflicted. Dorgos ended the conversation harshly and mockingly, saying that the question was foolish, because the Death Knight was nothing more than a slave to him. The Death Knight, who appeared to have once been enslaved, extended his hands toward the crown, saying that serving that body was his ultimate joy. But suddenly the crown flew away from him, and an expression of shock and confusion appeared on Dorgos's face. The crown was forcefully hurled in a different direction, as if an immense power had cast it away. Dorgos's followers were stunned, with astonishment clearly visible on their faces, unable to understand what was happening. Dorgos began channeling a tremendous power, his hands glowing with a blazing red fiery light. His demon kings braced themselves for battle, launching forward in an attempt to counter the Death Knight's assault. Despite this, the Death Knight appeared extremely angry and completely unafraid of Dorgos or his followers. Dorgos was gripped by intense panic, angrily and confusedly demanding to know what the Death Knight was doing, clearly surprised since he had not ordered this. The Death Knight responded with a clear voice, saying, finally, as his true identity and will began to surface. He openly declared that he now had full control over his body and that he moved solely by his own will. Dorgos was shocked, asking how the Death Knight could speak when he was certain he had completely erased his will. But the Death Knight replied that his will only appeared to be erased. It had never truly vanished. The Death Knight explained that he had been trapped inside his own body, silently witnessing everything without the ability to intervene. Dorgos, trying to regain control, admitted that the Death Knight was his greatest creation and said he would allow him to release his anger just for today. At Dorgos's command, his demon kings launched a coordinated assault against the Death Knight in an attempt to forcefully reassert control. But the Death Knight blocked the attack and unleashed an overwhelming and devastating power against them, terrifying Dorgos. This power caused a massive explosion of energy that blasted all of Dorgos's followers away in a single instant. Dorgos was stunned by the Death Knight's strength, as he had defeated the Demon Kings all at once. Following this, Dorgos decided to use a far more powerful incantation to reclaim control of the situation. He summoned his magical strength and awakened a vast army of the dead and phantoms to attack the Death Knight. This army of undead and demons launched into a furious, chaotic assault, charging toward the Death Knight. But the Death Knight stood firmly and bravely, showing no fear in the face of this overwhelming attack. With total confidence and power, the Death Knight ordered the undead army to halt immediately. Then, he issued a decisive command for all the undead and demons to self-destruct at once. The undead and demons obeyed this command without hesitation, instantly initiating mass suicide and self-detonation. This resulted in a massive and devastating explosion that nearly obliterated all beings surrounding Dorgos and filled him with dread. Dorgos was utterly astounded by this extraordinary power and asked himself in fear whether he had created a monster with strength rivaling that of the Overlord. Trying to de-escalate the situation, Dorgos told the Death Knight he understood his anger and would feel the same if he were in his place. But in his thoughts, Dorgos secretly reassured himself that even if his current body were destroyed, he could always transfer his soul to another backup body and regain control. In response, the Death Knight said he had spent the entirety of his long imprisonment within his body, thinking of the best way to kill Dorgos. The Death Knight began gathering an immense amount of energy, preparing for a tremendously powerful attack. The Death Knight declared that he had developed a unique sword technique specifically designed to kill Dorgos by tearing his soul apart permanently. Dorgos was gripped by terror and disbelief, convinced it was impossible. But sensing the true danger, he decided to evade the attack for now. He rushed away swiftly, trying to escape the deadly blow rapidly approaching him. However, the Death Knight easily caught up to him and delivered a devastating strike from above, creating a colossal spectacle in the sky. A strange moment of silence passed over Dorgos, who appeared visibly shaken and in denial of what had just happened. For a brief moment, Dorgos thought he had survived and began to laugh mockingly, calling the technique nothing more than an illusion. But suddenly, he let out a painful, shocking scream as the Death Knight's blow pierced his body with finality. Dorgos's body was hurled upward by force, forming a vortex of dark energy that surrounded him as he plummeted. His body continued falling from the sky, consumed by agony and disbelief. Then, his body exploded violently from the impact of the strike, while the Death Knight stood calmly, watching the scene unfold. Dorgos's shattered head struck the ground with brutal force. The Death Knight approached him and without hesitation or mercy told him to go to hell, then raised his foot to crush what remained of Dorgos's head. With decisive force, the Death Knight crushed the remnants of Dorgos's skull beneath his foot, ending his existence completely. Emperor Horad watched it all in utter shock, wondering aloud what had just occurred. Afterward, the Death Knight collapsed to his knees in exhaustion and quietly said that it was finally over. In a deep stillness, the Death Knight resolved to do one last thing that had to be done. He silently wished he could see those people he had lost, if only in death. He felt the need to apologize to those he had harmed while under Dorgos's control. He vividly remembered his past actions, how he had once impaled an innocent person and lifted them mercilessly with his sword. Tears welled in his eyes from deep sorrow and regret as he silently repeated his apology to the family he had wronged. In a defining moment, the Death Knight plunged his sword into his own body with great force, ending his life as atonement for his sins. Suddenly, he heard a soft voice calling his name, Damien, and he realized it was the voice of his sister. A clear image of his sister appeared before him, gently asking why he was sleeping in such a place, and he felt an overwhelming sense of peace. His sister appeared youthful and beautiful, and Damien was surprised, wondering silently how she looked so young. Then he was caught off guard by her gentle smile. He asked her, astonished, "Why do you look so young?" She laughed sweetly and asked if he was trying to flatter her, so she would defend him when their father scolded him. She told him to trust her and come home quickly. It might rain soon. Damien awakened in confusion to see his sister running toward their family home, watching the scene in disbelief. Suddenly he remembered that he had destroyed the palace with his own hands. How could it still be standing before his eyes? Damien looked at his hands in astonishment, wondering if he was dreaming in that very moment. But then terrifying thoughts rushed in as he remembered Dorgos holding him like a puppet and wondered if everything he had just lived through was the dream, or if what he now saw was the dream. After Damien began to doubt the reality of what he was seeing, he decided to test it for himself using a small wooden stick on the ground. He picked up the stick and walked toward a large rock, thinking this test would be enough to reveal the truth. Damien struck the rock with great force using the stick, as if executing a high-level combat technique. But the stick shattered immediately upon impact, shocking Damien completely. At first, Damien thought it was madness. Perhaps nothing unusual had really happened. But just moments later, the rock exploded with tremendous force from the impact of the strike, revealing the incredible power Damien now possessed. Damien began to laugh softly at first, surprised by what had happened. But his soft laughter quickly transformed into hysterical laughter, reflecting his deep shock and disbelief. He collapsed onto the ground, exhausted, breathing heavily from the overwhelming surprise. He remained seated in the rain, clenching his fists tightly in pain and tension, trying to grasp what was happening. At that moment, Damien became completely certain that what had happened to him wasn't just a dream, it was all real. A deep smile formed on his rain-soaked face, and he declared to himself that he had truly returned to the past. Damien began to recall his previous life, regretting his talent for causing trouble, as he had always heard his family say, "He really is crazy." He remembered his angry father scolding him, saying that he had embarrassed the family after being thrown out of a public venue for causing a scene. He also recalled how his brother had been furious with him for hitting the son of Marquis Leon Bloom, which led to a major scandal, and how his brother berated him because his sister Louise was dragged away as a result of his reckless behavior. He saw an image of his sister crying helplessly in a carriage after her future was destroyed by his actions. He also remembered his mother crying bitterly and asking why he had mortgaged the family lands and borrowed money so irresponsibly. Damien remembered with sorrow how he didn't stop there. He went on to squander all of the family's assets through his actions. In the end, as a result of all this, his father decisively expelled him from the house and ordered him never to return. At that moment of his departure, his sister Louise stopped him and gave him some money, begging him to be happy despite everything. His sister smiled at him with deep affection and said, "Be happy," which caused Damien's heart to ache painfully. Damien felt overwhelming guilt for having ruined his sister's life through his grave mistakes. He then grabbed the money from her hand abruptly, pushing her hand away and walking off quickly, filled with indescribable shame and inner pain. That day, when he fled from his family's home, he felt, for the first time in his life, true guilt and shame. Damien sat on the ground thinking and wondering how he had returned to the past. He began to recall the final moments of his previous life, when he had decided to apologize to his family before dying, and he never expected to truly return to the past. He raised his head toward the sky and wondered if what had happened was a miracle from the divine. Suddenly, Damien noticed something strange in his hand, which made him question even more the reality of his current situation. Damien sat in contemplation, recalling how he had once struggled in the past to perform even basic combat techniques, especially the technique known as Shattering Wave. The technique was illustrated vividly in his mind, showing the immense power and destructive energy it generated. Damien explained to himself that it was a skill that amplified the force and impact of a strike, granting it astonishing destructive strength. He recalled a past battle against a powerful knight, where this technique was famously known as Wall Breaker. Damien affirmed to himself that he had acquired this specific skill after defeating and killing that formidable knight. Suddenly a voice called out from afar, "Young master," prompting Damien to calmly turn toward the sound. He saw a servant running toward him eagerly, approaching quickly from the house. Damien looked at the servant thoughtfully and tried to remember his name, wondering silently, what was his name again? Was it Victor? He hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Victor?" trying to confirm the name. The servant quickly and nervously confirmed, saying that Lady Louise had requested his immediate return to the house and was surprised he was still outside. The servant added awkwardly that the head of the family was furious, which made Damien pause and wonder, "Did I do something wrong?" The servant was startled by the question and replied sharply in disbelief, "No, and are you seriously saying you don't know what you did?" Damien's face showed clear confusion and surprise. He clearly hadn't yet remembered what trouble he had caused. Suddenly, a furious voice roared from inside the house. "You scoundrel!" It was the voice of the Viscount of House Haxon. When Damien entered the house, he was met with an attempted strike from his father, but he swiftly dodged the blow with impressive skill. Because of how cleanly Damien avoided the strike, his father lost balance and fell to the floor, stunned by his son's sudden display of power and precision. Damien looked down at his fallen father, who shouted angrily, "You really are insane." His father stood back up, furious, yelling that Damien had been thrown out of a tavern after starting a massive fight, bringing shame upon the entire family. Damien's mother and sister tried to hold him back and calm him down. Damien clearly remembered that this specific moment had happened in the past, and he now realized he had returned to it once again. His sister and mother pleaded with the father, urging him to calm down and think rationally. His mother asked, "Do you truly want to kill Damien?" Damien looked at his family, and their names became clear again. His father Paul Haxon, his mother Merida Haxon, and his sister Louise Haxon. He longed to see their faces once more. Overcome by emotion, Damien suddenly began to cry quietly in front of his family, who couldn't understand the reason for his unexpected tears. His sister asked in confusion if Damien was really crying, and his mother, filled with sorrow, remarked that perhaps everything had become too painful for him. His father broke the silence with a sharp question, demanding to know what kind of excuse Damien had prepared this time, telling him to speak if he had anything to say. But Damien responded with calm and unwavering clarity, "I have no excuses." His father was visibly stunned by the unexpected answer, repeating with disbelief, "No excuses?" He couldn't believe it, asking how Damien, the one who always made pathetic justifications, could say something like that now. Damien calmly and clearly admitted that he had tarnished the honor of House Haxon with his mistakes, and that he accepted full responsibility without offering a single excuse. His father remained unconvinced, suspecting that Damien was merely trying to evade punishment, and said he wouldn't let him off so easily. Damien then stood respectfully and gave a slight bow to his father, who was taken aback, wondering what Damien truly meant by saying, "I will take care of it." Damien began walking away, telling his family that he would personally go and resolve the problem he had caused. He paused briefly at the door, turned toward his father, and told him that he would return, once he had dealt with the matter, to receive the punishment he deserved. Damien smiled with clear confidence as he left the house, assuring them that he would come back to accept whatever sentence his father decided, once everything was resolved. After he left, his family remained in a state of stunned silence. The father, clearly bewildered, wondered aloud if Damien had taken a blow to the head that had affected his mind, considering how strange and sudden his behavior was. Damien arrived at the commercial city, known for its dense buildings and recognizable landmarks. As he walked through the city alongside his servant Victor, the latter informed him that they had reached their destination. Victor looked at Damien with concern and asked whether he was truly determined to enter such a dangerous place, rumored to be backed by a criminal organization, expressing his fear that something might go wrong. Damien replied calmly that if Victor was afraid, he could return home first, but Victor insisted on staying by his side despite his fear. Damien turned to Victor with a confident smile and told him not to worry. He was only going to offer a polite apology to the owner of the place, and nothing bad would happen. He promised Victor that he would resolve the matter completely in return. Damien continued walking toward the target location, while Victor followed behind, hoping things would go smoothly. As he walked alone, Damien once again wondered how he had returned to the past in such a strange way. But he resolved not to waste the opportunity that fate, or perhaps the divine, had granted him, and promised himself never to bring harm to his family again. He vowed as he walked through the city that he would fix every mistake he had made in the past, one by one. While walking, he was noticed by two shady-looking men. One of them was surprised to see him again. The two men approached and asked him with clear disdain why he had returned, despite their previous warning not to show his face again. Damien looked at them, trying to remember. Something about their faces felt oddly familiar, even after all this time. He answered confidently and calmly that he had only come to apologize to the owner for the trouble he had caused last time. The two men stared at him in stunned silence for a moment. Then they began to mock him openly. One of them laughed mockingly and said he would deliver the apology to the boss, while the other seemed surprised at Damien's unexpectedly refined demeanor. One of them commented that he had heard Damien was the reckless eldest son of a disgraceful family, but he seemed more rational now than expected. Then they began to mock him cruelly, saying they had heard about Damien's beautiful sister and started speaking about her in an indecent and offensive manner. One of them grabbed Damien's face violently and sneered, saying he wanted him to apologize right now, and demanded he offer his beautiful sister in exchange for forgiveness. Damien felt intense rage and disgust rise within him, while the man suddenly noticed something strange happening. In a sudden move, Damien easily snatched the knife from the man's hand and stood before him, calmly waving it. He admitted that he had believed he could settle the matter quickly and return without trouble, but it seemed he had overestimated himself this time. The other man began shouting angrily and attempted to attack Damien again. But before he could reach him, he was struck by a sudden and powerful blow that severed his hand. The second man was stunned to find deep wounds on his face, while the entire scene descended into shock and confusion. Damien stood his ground powerfully before the men who had attacked him, and a terrifying dark aura emanated from him, stunning everyone around. With chilling composure, Damien declared that he would show these men what they truly wanted to see, then dashed toward them at incredible speed. He braced himself with immense power, and a fearsome shadow appeared behind him, causing onlookers to wonder in disbelief just how reckless the infamous eldest son of House Haxon truly was. Meanwhile, Victor the servant watched the events from a distance, trembling as he called out to his young master in deep concern. Victor began shouting with frustration and worry, reminding Damien that he had said he would handle it himself. At the same time, shouting and cries began to rise from within the building that Damien had entered. Some bystanders tried to peer inside, but one of them warned the other not to interfere, lest they get themselves into trouble. Damien stood calmly before the two men who had assaulted him and asked if they even knew who he was. He then answered his own question, saying he didn't care who they were, and that he was here to finish what they had started. One of the men shouted in anger, introducing themselves as members of the Black Serpent Gang, an organization no one dared to provoke without consequences in this city. Upon hearing the name, Damien's memory became perfectly clear. He recalled more details about the Black Serpent Gang, how they controlled the streets and instilled fear throughout the city. He remembered how these very men had once beaten him viciously and humiliatingly, simply because he protested an inflated bill at one of the gang's establishments. He recalled being humiliated and brutalized by the gang's men until he was forced to submit completely. As those memories came flooding back, Damien smiled, a dark and chilling smile, and realized that he was the one who truly deserved an apology. One of the gang members began threatening Damien, saying he wouldn't go easy on him this time just because he was a noble, then prepared to strike. The man charged with all his strength, swinging his weapon at Damien, who stood completely ready. Damien dodged the attack with astonishing ease, leaving the man stunned and unable to process what had just happened. The gang member collapsed to the ground in pain, coughing violently. Damien approached him with terrifying calm and said that even if he killed every member of the gang, it still wouldn't be enough to calm his rage. He raised his weapon over the man's head, but in the last moment he held himself back, for his family's sake. Despite the man begging and pleading, Damien delivered a brutal blow that left a massive impact. After the strike, both men lay on the ground in excruciating pain, unable to move. From a distance, another gang member shouted angrily, watching the scene unfold, demanding to know who this man was who had caused such chaos. Damien was soon confronted by another group of gang members, fully prepared to engage. The new group's leader asked if Damien belonged to another organization and wanted to know which faction he was with. Damien responded calmly and clearly that he wasn't part of any organization. He had come with the intention of apologizing, but now he was the one demanding an apology from the owner of the place for what had happened. The gang leader didn't believe Damien's words and warned that if he wasn't willing to come quietly, they would have no choice but to use force. The leader then gave the order to attack, pointing directly at Damien with authority. The gang members rushed at Damien with terrifying speed, while he, feeling slightly fatigued from the repeated confrontations, braced himself again. He took a deep breath in preparation for the coming battle, with clear signs of determination and resolve etched across his face. Damien began fighting with swift, precise movements, dodging the gang members' attacks and landing powerful, rapid strikes with astonishing strength. The gang members were struck with disbelief and agony, screaming in pain and confusion over what was happening, while their leader stood frozen, watching his men fall one by one. Despite Damien's overwhelming strength, he felt severely fatigued and admitted to himself that he was already breathless from even this small effort. Then Damien asked their leader if he still wanted to continue fighting. But to his surprise, the gang leader backed away in terror and pleaded with Damien for forgiveness, begging him to spare him. However, Damien did not accept the apology so easily. He charged at the man once more with terrifying speed, prompting him to run away, screaming in fear. The terrified leader fled in total panic, desperate to escape Damien's unstoppable rage. Inside the tavern, the atmosphere was calm, with patrons chatting, unaware of the chaos outside. But soon, the unusual noise from outside caught their attention, and they paused for a moment, listening curiously. Just then, the gang leader burst into the tavern in a state of terror, muttering to himself in a trembling voice that he had failed to control the situation. Moments later, in a state of shock, he suddenly realized Damien was already right behind him. Damien spoke with mocking sarcasm, threatening the man and telling him that he should have listened when he was still being spoken to politely. In a sudden dramatic moment, Damien hurled the gang leader across the tavern with tremendous force, drawing the attention and shock of everyone present. After doing so, Damien suddenly realized the situation he had placed himself in, and a look of astonishment and disbelief crossed his face. The place quickly descended into chaos. The guests began screaming and running in fear, shouting that there was a killer and urging everyone to flee. Damien stood calmly in the middle of the room after the initial panic subsided, convinced that he had dealt with the hardest part of the current problem. But soon, a new voice echoed from above, questioning what was causing all this commotion. The tavern owner, Anderson Holm, appeared, visibly angry and surprised at the disappearance of his guards. Damien replied calmly and with clear confidence that he had handled the guards accordingly, which only further enraged and shocked the tavern owner. Anderson looked at his injured men in disbelief, astonished that this young man had managed to defeat members of the Black Serpent Gang so easily. He demanded to know who Damien was and how he dared to cause trouble in his establishment. Damien responded clearly and proudly with his full name, Damien Haxon, which made Anderson visibly more surprised as he realized Damien was a noble from the Haxon family. Damien clarified that he hadn't come to cause trouble, but rather to receive an apology from the tavern owner himself. Anderson was baffled by this, and Damien continued, explaining that in the past, this place had charged outrageous prices, and when Damien protested, he had been beaten and humiliated by gang members, an event that gave him a terrible reputation as a drunken troublemaker in the city. Damien then recalled the day his father expelled him from the house because of his repeated misbehavior, and he continued harshly, stating that the incident had cost his family dearly and caused them great suffering. But Anderson mocked Damien's words, sarcastically suggesting that perhaps he was mourning his lost honor, then added with scorn that he didn't believe House Haxon had any honor left to lose in the first place. In a moment of anger, Anderson tried to provoke Damien, mocking him and calling him pathetic, and said he would never apologize, instead demanding Damien pay damages for the destruction he had caused. Damien responded with a mysterious and quiet smile, admitting to himself that he might have forgiven the man if he had simply apologized politely. But now that he had chosen confrontation, Damien was left with only one option. In a swift and unexpected moment, Damien prepared to take one final decisive step, causing Anderson to freeze in shock and brace himself for what was coming. Damien began moving at incredible speed toward his opponent above, in a scene that left everyone in the room astonished. He issued a clear threat, declaring that his opponent would pay dearly for what he had said earlier, and a look of fierce determination spread across Damien's face. A sharp, threatening glint appeared in Damien's eyes as he prepared to deliver a powerful strike with his knife. Suddenly, a very fast and unexpected movement appeared toward Damien, catching him off guard and surprising him. A violent clash erupted, releasing a powerful and dazzling aura that shocked Damien with its intensity. Damien was suddenly knocked to the ground by the force of the aura, while Anderson watched from above with a mix of awe and concern. At that moment, Anderson emerged from behind the mysterious knight and greeted him with clear relief, referring to him as Lord Ted. Damien was surprised that someone like Lord Ted would be working in a place like this. In that instant, Damien felt a surge of shock and silently questioned why a knight would be present in such a place. The knight known as Ted appeared in full view, clad in an elegant suit of armor, his facial features partially concealed in the shadows, heightening the sense of dread surrounding his presence. A brief exposition introduced the ranks of knights, from trainees to fully fledged knights capable of skillful aura manipulation. The hierarchy was clearly explained: trainee, advanced trainee, then full knight. It was noted that full knights possessed extraordinary strength and a superhuman ability to wield aura. The narration added that full knights could destroy mountains with a single blow or slice through fortress walls like paper. The tavern owner let out a mocking, boastful laugh as he proudly announced that the knight before them, Ted, was merely an advanced trainee of the Black Serpent Gang. He continued smugly, threatening that Damien was as good as dead. But Damien mocked him, saying, "So he's just a trainee then," which provoked Ted, who remained silent for a moment. Damien added sarcastically that he had sensed an extremely weak aura coming from Ted, which clearly meant he had not yet mastered full aura control. Damien wondered to himself why a knight, even a trainee, would be working in such a low-grade place. He suspected Ted had been expelled for lacking talent. The tavern owner then began offering Ted money to eliminate Damien quickly, attempting to turn the situation to his advantage. But Ted deferred the payment, preferring to deal with Damien first and settle things personally. Ted launched into a swift and violent assault toward Damien, threatening that he would make him regret his insolence. Damien met the attack with great composure and steadiness, showing no signs of fear. The clash that followed was immensely powerful, shattering the floor beneath their feet. Even so, Damien admitted to himself that his opponent was quite good for just a trainee. He noticed with precision how steady Ted's movements were. The edge of his weapon didn't waver, even during his broad, forceful strikes. Ted unleashed another dazzling attack, infused with aura, which impressed and caught Damien's full attention. Damien began to feel extreme fatigue and exhaustion from the prolonged fight, realizing that his body was approaching its limit. In contrast, Ted grew increasingly enraged and shouted at Damien, "You bastard, let's see how you dodge this one." In the final scene, Ted gathered all his strength and delivered a strike charged with energy and aura, fully intent on ending the battle. Damien instantly understood the nature of the incoming attack and murmured to himself, "That technique." His opponent, Ted, unleashed a secret technique, one that appeared majestic and frighteningly powerful, drawing upon massive energy. Damien decided to respond with a special technique of his own and began preparing firmly and steadily for a counterattack. Suddenly, memories of the past flashed through Damien's mind, especially the time he fought someone named Dorgos, who at that very moment seemed surprised to be summoned in that memory. Another fearsome figure appeared, Lord of the Death Knights, charging in at high speed and delivering a decisive blow. The Death Knight Lord addressed someone else, commanding him to shut his mouth and leave immediately if he wanted to stay alive. But the man refused to leave, standing defiantly with his weapon in hand, boldly facing the threat. The Death Knight Lord, clearly irritated by the man's persistence, declared that he had no choice but to kill him as well. He began revealing his strange ability, explaining in a chilling tone that the human body is composed mostly of water. His form transformed into something fluid, almost aquatic, making the moment even more terrifying and unnatural. Using a unique technique, the Death Knight Lord allowed his weapon to pass through his opponent's body as if it were made of water, meeting no resistance at all. The opponent immediately collapsed to the ground from the fatal strike, and the Death Knight Lord explained that even a wooden weapon could pierce a human with that technique. He approached his fallen opponent and told him that he should have run when he had the chance. Suddenly, the Death Knight Lord sensed something suspicious and began to glance around with obvious unease. To his shock, something began to form around him. It was clear from his expression that he was now facing something unexpected and extremely dangerous. The Death Knight Lord was completely stunned, asking in fear and disbelief how his opponent was still standing. He wondered aloud if the man was one of the undead. He began gathering all of his strength once more, preparing to face the new threat before him. Yet before he could act, he was struck by a sudden and incredibly powerful surprise attack, leaving him gravely wounded. In disbelief, he questioned the source of this power. Signs of shock and collapse appeared on his face, and he asked his opponent with visible fear, "How do you know that technique?" Then the scene returned to Ted, who had sustained a critical injury and stood frozen in place for a moment, realizing immediately that this was his inevitable end. Ted, the trainee knight, collapsed to the ground without moving, a shocking sight to all who witnessed it. In that moment, Damien realized that all of his past battles had always ended the same way. Anyone who raised a weapon against him met the same fate in the end. Damien revealed to himself his unique ability, absorbing the power of his enemies and using it against them. The tavern owner trembled violently as he watched what had just happened, retreating in terror after witnessing Damien's overwhelming power. Fear and panic spread across the tavern owner's face as he stared at Damien, fully aware of the dangerous situation he had placed himself in. Suddenly, the tavern owner bowed and apologized profusely to Damien, expressing deep regret for tarnishing the reputation of the noble Haxon family. He offered Damien a large financial settlement as compensation for the humiliation he suffered, nervously asking if that would be enough to satisfy him. Damien accepted the offer reluctantly, telling himself that while the apology was the primary goal, he certainly wouldn't reject extra money. He turned calmly and gave an order for someone to gather all the money and valuables in the place, with full confidence and unmistakable authority. Victor, the servant, peeked in hesitantly, responding immediately to Damien's command with visible nervousness. "Yes, sir." As he observed what had happened, Victor thought to himself in astonishment that if he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he never would have believed it. He wondered with great amazement when and where Damien had learned swordsmanship to such an incredible degree. The tavern owner began bidding farewell to Damien and Victor with polite, nervous gestures, hoping they would stay safe on their way back. As they left, Victor exclaimed excitedly that it was the first time in his life he had seen so much gold and treasure, while the tavern owner remained silent and visibly upset. Deeply angered, the tavern owner swore to himself that he would reclaim every single gold coin from Damien, and that he would seek help from the Black Serpent's boss. But his train of thought was suddenly interrupted when he was struck by a sudden blow, causing panic and shock among those nearby. The tavern owner screamed in pain, clutching his injured ear after being hit by one of Damien's merciless secret techniques. Damien approached with a clear threat and told the tavern owner to deliver a message to the Black Serpent Gang, that he would never forgive them if they ever thought of harming his family again. The tavern owner lay on the ground in immense pain, muttering threats and hatred under his breath, vowing that he would one day take revenge on Damien. Damien and Victor left the place calmly under the evening sunset, carrying the treasures they had obtained. As they departed, Damien reflected to himself, fully aware that what he had done would not erase all of his past mistakes. Still, he vowed that in this second chance at life, he would never again disappoint or fail his family. Damien turned to Victor with a smile and asked him to return home, to which Victor happily responded, "Yes, young master." Meanwhile, elsewhere, a luxurious mansion came into view, bearing the name Marquis Leon Bloom. Inside the mansion, a young figure spoke gently to his brother, asking if he had ever heard the saying, "Love always comes with pain." The brother looked at him in confusion and mockingly asked if he was heading to a duel, based on his dramatic expression. But the young man replied calmly, with a mysterious smile, saying he wasn't going to a duel. He was on a quest to find love. At that moment, Damien and Victor arrived at the Haxon Barony estate. Damien stretched comfortably and said to Victor that he hadn't slept that deeply in a long time. Victor silently admitted to himself, with a hint of envy, how Damien was able to sleep so peacefully, while he had spent the whole night awake, worrying about what had happened the day before. Damien chuckled lightly, admitting that things had gone quite differently from what he originally planned, but in the end, they had received generous compensation, and more importantly, he added with visible confidence that rumors about what he did would soon spread everywhere, and that no one would dare look down on House Haxon ever again. Victor agreed and began to look at Damien differently, realizing for the first time that he possessed a sharp mind and real awareness he hadn't noticed before. Still, he expressed concern again about the Black Serpent Gang, especially since they had left behind the trainee knight and several gang members in terrible condition. Damien reassured him with great confidence, saying that no matter how bold the gang was, they wouldn't dare attack a noble family so easily, and if they did, he would face them himself. Victor admired Damien's impressive skill in combat and asked with great curiosity where and when he had learned such advanced techniques. Damien replied with slight hesitation and a nervous smile, saying he had only trained from time to time whenever he found the chance. At that moment, their conversation was abruptly cut short by a loud, furious voice shouting Damien's name. Damien's father suddenly appeared, furious and storming toward him, yelling in rage and demanding to know where he had been all day. Damien's father rushed toward him and grabbed him anxiously, demanding to know if Damien had caused more trouble again. Damien smiled confidently and reassured his father, saying that, just as he had promised, he had resolved the issue he caused. He then asked Victor to show his father what they had acquired. Victor opened the large bag filled with gold and treasures, leaving Damien's parents completely stunned as they shouted in shock, "Our money!" Damien explained the situation, saying he had returned to the tavern where he had been thrown out and cleared up the misunderstanding there. It turned out the mistake had been in the billing, which led the tavern owner to give them these treasures as an apology. Though still amazed, the father silently wondered if he could really believe such a story, but the mother confidently asserted that it had to be true, asking where else such treasure could have come from. Damien told his father that if he didn't believe him, he could ask Victor, who had been with him the whole time. He turned toward Victor, prompting him to confirm the story. Damien smiled again with clear confidence, urging Victor once more to affirm his words. Victor hesitated for a moment, then stammered out a confirmation, which finally convinced Damien's parents completely. While everyone expressed great admiration for Damien, Victor quietly admitted to himself that Damien couldn't say a single sentence without lying, a realization that left him both impressed and baffled. Outside, in a quiet place, Damien breathed a sigh of relief, satisfied that the problem had been resolved in his favor. He began sprinting through the forest at full speed, testing his current endurance and physical capacity. But he soon began to feel exhausted and breathless, stopping to lean against a nearby tree. As he caught his breath, Damien worriedly reflected on his current body and how its limitations would prevent him from achieving the goals he had set. Still, Damien smiled brightly and pulled out a small vial, telling himself how lucky he was to have acquired such a valuable item. He recalled how he had once asked the tavern owner curiously about the contents of this mysterious little bottle. Suddenly, the tavern owner had explained that the vial contained a special tonic created by the Dan School of Alchemy, designed to significantly enhance stamina and energy. Damien had asked, puzzled, about the Dan School of Alchemy, to which the tavern owner replied that it was a group specializing in the crafting of tonics and alchemical elixirs. Damien suddenly remembered that he had heard of the school before. It was highly renowned, and its products were so valuable that they were sold by weight in gemstones. He smiled again in relief, acknowledging just how fortunate he was to have obtained such a rare and valuable tonic. Damien began to use the tonic, hoping that the formula would yield strong, positive effects. A powerful and vibrant aura began to form around him, and Damien could feel the surge of strength and energy the tonic was providing. He began seriously planning for the future, firmly telling himself that if he wanted to gain true strength, he would first need to enhance his stamina. Damien resolved that he must reach the same level of strength he once had in his past life, especially to confront Dorgos. He vividly remembered Dorgos's terrifying face and was certain that in just a few years, Dorgos's undead followers would return to this world. Therefore, Damien firmly decided that he needed to obtain the power necessary to kill Dorgos before that happened. He knew that only by reaching that level of strength would he truly be able to protect his family's happiness. Damien exhaled deeply and calmly, ready for the steps ahead in his journey toward power. He leapt forward with force and dashed ahead, vowing powerfully to himself, "This time I will kill you for sure, Dorgos." Meanwhile, in a distant and shadowy scene, the hidden base of the Black Serpent was shown under the moonlight, the place where Dorgos apparently resided. Inside the hideout, a man spoke coldly while eating carelessly, stating that the one who had been defeated was no longer useful, and that they had just lost one of their best men. The members of the Black Serpent gang expressed regret over Ted's condition and wondered if they should at least provide him some medical attention. But their leader, Cedric Walker, coldly ordered them to ignore him and throw him away, declaring that he was no longer of any use. One of the men hesitated at Cedric's command, nervously questioning whether he was certain, but Cedric firmly insisted that Ted be dumped somewhere far away. Cedric expressed his cruelty clearly, saying there was no need for a dog that had outlived its usefulness. They could simply hire someone else with money. Suddenly, Ted began to stir, struggling to rise, drawing everyone's surprised attention. Cedric noticed this and scoffed, saying, "Looks like he's got enough strength to move after all." With a wicked smile, Cedric mockingly offered Ted another chance, saying that if he accepted medical treatment, he'd consider rehiring him. But Ted angrily rejected the offer and rushed forward with speed, shouting that he didn't need Cedric's charity. Just as he charged, Ted suddenly froze midair in a disturbing and mysterious moment that stunned everyone watching. A shadowy aura of dark energy appeared behind Ted without warning, and he looked shocked and confused. He was struck violently by the dark force, screaming in panic and demanding to know what the hell was happening. At that moment, a cloaked man appeared and asked Cedric, the Black Serpent boss, whether this level of power was sufficient as an initial demonstration. Cedric replied with clear satisfaction, "Of course," and told him to show what else he could do, while Ted screamed in rage, demanding to be released. The mysterious man began chanting an incantation, or words in a strange arcane language, causing Ted's anxiety to intensify. A terrifying dark energy began to swirl around Ted, making him scream in sheer terror without understanding what was happening. Forms of demonic-looking energy began to manifest around him, creatures with glowing red eyes and sharp fangs, pushing him to the brink as he begged for mercy. The dark aura grew stronger and completely engulfed Ted, intensifying his fear as he cried for his life. A massive burst of dark energy erupted, slamming Ted violently into the ground. His body struck the floor with devastating force, creating a brutal and painful scene. Cedric watched in disgust and commented coldly and dismissively on what had just happened. The cloaked man asked Cedric whether he was satisfied with the demonstration. Cedric replied that he was, but requested that the next time be cleaner. The mysterious man then asked what the next assignment would be. Cedric told him that this was exactly why he had summoned him. Cedric began to outline the next mission with a sinister grin, explaining that a certain noble had caused harm to their organization, and he wanted revenge, but indirectly. He added that the payment would increase with the damage inflicted. Cedric handed over the advance payment for the mission, and the cloaked man accepted it with quiet thanks. The mysterious man gave a chilling smile and assured Cedric that he could count on him for the task ahead. Elsewhere, Damien was beginning to feel tired from the intense training he had been undergoing. Despite the exhaustion, Damien pushed himself forward with serious determination, visibly improving his performance. He noticed that the tonic he had used was extremely effective. His stamina had increased noticeably in a short period. Despite the good progress, Damien couldn't help but feel uneasy. He noticed that things had been strangely quiet for days. He had expected the Black Serpent gang to retaliate quickly, but was surprised that nothing had happened yet, leaving him with the uneasy sense that something was happening behind the scenes. Damien noticed a sudden strange movement behind him and quickly turned, ready to confront it, muttering to himself, "Just as I thought." He dashed forward at great speed, cursing in anger at those black serpent bastards. He delivered a strong strike with his hand toward the figure hiding in the bushes, who let out a loud cry of pain. Suddenly Damien froze in shock as he looked at the face of the person he had struck, recognizing him and exclaiming, "You!" It was his younger brother Abel Haxon who looked up at him in terror, hesitantly calling out, "Big brother." Abel sat on the ground, wincing and stunned by what had just happened. He then regained his composure and chuckled, telling Damien that he had gotten a lot stronger since the last time they met, joking that he thought Damien had almost snapped his neck. In that moment, Damien recalled a painful memory from the past, of seeing Abel lying lifeless on the ground. Damien fell silent for a moment, deeply affected by the memory. He reached out his hand in sincere apology and said to Abel, "That wasn't on purpose." Abel looked at Damien's hand for a moment, still hesitant. After a brief pause, Damien continued, clarifying that he hadn't come just to apologize. Abel replied seriously, saying that their father had mentioned Damien had gone to the tavern to resolve the issue peacefully, but later found out that a fight had broken out and people were injured. Abel stared at Damien with doubt in his eyes, asking, "You can't be the one who did that? Are you lying to the family?" Damien responded with calm confidence, assuring his brother, "No, it's true. I did it myself." Abel lashed out angrily, accusing Damien of lying and asking if he had hired someone else to do it, since he wasn't someone capable of fighting. He then pointed at Damien, warning him not to bring more disgrace to the family, and complained that he always had to clean up after his messes. Damien gently placed his hand on Abel's head, trying to calm him and reconnect with him. Inside, Damien reflected that Abel had always been the sharp-minded one, the one who put the family's interests above all else. With a soft smile, Damien reassured Abel, saying, "There's nothing to worry about. Nothing bad will happen again." Their conversation was suddenly interrupted by a voice calling out from a distance, one of the family's servants, shouting urgently, "Young masters!" He ran toward them, out of breath, yelling, "There's a serious problem." The brothers looked at him with surprise and concern, clearly wondering what was going on. They rushed back toward the house in a state of anxiety and tension. Damien opened the door quickly and entered the room, followed closely by Abel, whose face showed deep concern about what might happen. As soon as Damien stepped inside, his father called out in visible anger, "Damien, you—" Then, a calm voice came from inside the room saying, "So, you're here?" Erwin Leon Bloom appeared with a provocative smile and said that he had just been explaining to Damien's father what happened at the recent party and apologized for his unexpected visit. Damien thought angrily that this scene had already happened before and clearly remembered that this person was Erwin Leon Bloom. He recalled from his previous life the exact moment that took place during the party. At that time, Damien had shouted in rage at Erwin, yelling, "What the hell did you just say?" while Erwin had tried to defend himself, insisting that he hadn't meant to insult anyone. Damien shouted angrily at Erwin, reminding him that he had mocked him and attempted to harass his sister, while Erwin replied mockingly that perhaps Damien was drunk since he didn't recall anything like that. Erwin leaned closer provocatively and whispered rudely, "And what if I had actually done it?" A wicked and challenging smile appeared on Erwin's face as he clearly said, "And what could you do about it if I had said it?" further infuriating Damien. Damien recalled how, in the past, he had to restrain himself in situations like this, despite his intense anger. Without hesitation, Damien delivered a crushing punch to Erwin's face, knocking him forcefully to the ground. Erwin collapsed, blood spurting from his face, groaning in pain from the force of the strike. Damien thought, as he observed the situation, that although Erwin was an experienced knight, he took his punch easily, as if he had intended it to happen. Then, Erwin tried to twist the situation to his advantage, feigning embarrassment as he openly confessed his deep admiration for Louise and suddenly proposed the idea of marrying her to her father. Erwin sat calmly on the sofa and clearly stated that he sought the Viscount's blessing to officially marry Louise. Erwin announced clearly and seriously his intention to marry Louise. The entire family was stunned, clearly showing expressions of shock and extreme disbelief. Damien thought to himself that Erwin was repeating the same scheme he had used in his previous life to blackmail his family. Erwin maliciously suggested to Louise's father that they consider the situation as a simple family misunderstanding if he agreed to the marriage. Louise's father responded decisively, firmly cutting him off, saying it was impossible and would never happen. Erwin gave a wicked smile, wondering aloud how much the Haxon family could endure the wrath of his own family, demanding they take responsibility for insulting him. Erwin cruelly gave Louise's father two harsh choices: either pay the price for insulting him or agree to his marriage with Louise. Louise's father inwardly realized that the Leon Bloom family was extremely powerful in the kingdom, yet he couldn't possibly give his daughter to someone infamous for his bad reputation. At that moment, Louise quietly and steadily entered the room. Louise gazed firmly at everyone and calmly announced, to everyone's surprise, that she agreed to the marriage proposal. Everyone burst into shock. Her father shouted loudly, rejecting her decision, while Abel stood stunned and angry, demanding that she reconsider. Damien approached her with clear sadness, whispering quietly, "Sister." Louise responded with a calm smile, telling him, "It's all right, I will follow Lord Irwin," internally clarifying that she was doing this for her family, even in this lifetime. Irwin inwardly smiled triumphantly, thinking, "This is enough." He spitefully and maliciously praised Louise's decision, and announced that he would soon send someone to arrange the official engagement. Damien stared sharply at Irwin, approaching him with confident steps, clearly challenging him. Irwin smiled provocatively and asked Damien if he had something to say, then continued rudely, "Oh, perhaps I should call you my dear brother-in-law now." Damien felt intense anger at Irwin's disrespectful behavior, accusing him internally of ruining his sister's life so casually and coldly. Louise noticed her brother Damien's concern and calmly called out to him, trying to stop him. Irwin continued provoking Damien with a sarcastic smile, directing his words once more toward him, saying mockingly, "I didn't hear you clearly, dear brother-in-law." In a moment of intense rage, Damien delivered an extremely powerful punch to Irwin's face, knocking him to the ground, shouting angrily, "I didn't hear you clearly. Can you repeat that again?" Damien recalled how, in the past, he had to suppress his anger for the sake of his family and sister, but this time, he wouldn't hesitate and would face the situation with full courage. Damien stood angrily, glaring at Irwin, who had fallen to the ground from the force of his blow. He raised his fist high and shouted with clear fury, "He said no, you bastard, and he can't take any more of this." Then he remembered the moment when he had rushed out quickly, leaving the place in a storm of emotion. It was after hearing from one of the servants that the carriage carrying Miss Louise and Lord Irwin had just arrived, triggering Damien's urgent dash. Damien ran toward the door with great excitement, eager to see his sister Louise after such a long absence. But just as he neared the door, he suddenly heard a loud, terrifying scream from inside the room. The door opened slightly, and Damien saw Irwin violently grabbing Louise by the hair as she screamed in pain, while Irwin berated her harshly for forcing him to bring her back home. Irwin stepped closer to Louise and hurled extremely degrading words at her, accusing her of trying to leave him despite being from a filthy family, while continuing to hurt her. Louise collapsed painfully to the ground as Irwin loomed over her with a terrifying expression, muttering, "Ah, dear Louise." He then stood over her with a dreadful smile, threatening that he would teach her a lesson she would never forget, so she'd never dare say such things again. Damien watched the scene as he saw Irwin clench his fist, preparing to strike his sister Louise. Damien froze in place, overwhelmed by helplessness, and began to blame himself, remembering that what was happening to his sister now was the result of his own poor decision earlier. He fell to his knees, gripped by deep guilt, silently repeating that everything happening now was entirely his fault. Damien's eyes blazed with fury as he vowed to himself that he would never forgive Irwin Leonblum for what he had done. Damien stood up again, raising his fist high, and declared with fierce anger, he said no. Everyone in the room was in utter shock at Damien's audacity. Irwin's guards quickly moved toward him, drawing their weapons in disbelief at what had just happened to their master. The guards shouted furiously at Damien, "Don't tell us you actually dared to harm our young lord," as they pointed their swords at him. Irwin rose to his feet with difficulty, wiping his face calmly with a sarcastic smile, as if nothing had happened. He stood confidently while gripping his sword, and sneered at Damien, "You dared to strike my face not once, but twice." Irwin then directed a threatening statement at Damien, asking if he had a death wish or something of the sort. "Dear brother-in-law?" The guards rushed toward Damien in an attempt to regain control, trying to calm Irwin, who had lost his temper. But Irwin shouted at them furiously, ordering them to step aside, clearly intent on handling Damien himself. One of the guards tried to intervene, pleading, "Let me handle this insolent fool." But Irwin insisted on taking matters into his own hands. He unleashed a powerful aura that shoved the guards aside, and said firmly as he prepared for battle, he had ordered them to stand down. Abel and Louise watched the scene with fear, visibly alarmed by the escalating confrontation. Irwin stepped forward with his sword in hand, glaring at Damien and asking one last time, with unmistakable threat, "How do you intend to resolve this problem?" Louise felt deep fear, realizing that Irwin would no longer let Damien go so easily. Suddenly, Louise cried out desperately, trying to stop the violent clash. "Please stop!" Her face showed intense fear and concern, terrified that something terrible might happen to Damien if the confrontation continued. Damien stood protectively in front of Louise, extending his arm with clear confidence and determination, as if assuring her that he would not allow any further harm to come to her. He smiled gently, reassuring Louise not to worry, and promising that he would take care of the matter himself, while silently wishing from the depths of his heart that she would no longer have to sacrifice herself. Damien stepped forward and boldly addressed Erwin, proposing that they settle the issue with a duel. Erwin was surprised by the suggestion and asked in disbelief, "A duel?" To which Damien calmly explained that if Erwin defeated him in a fair duel, he would comply with his demand. But if Damien won, the issue would end right here and now. Erwin protested that the agreement didn't serve his interests, pointing out that Louise had already agreed to marry him. Damien smiled challengingly and mocked Erwin, saying, "Are you trying to change the subject? Because you look like you're afraid of losing." The comment deeply enraged Erwin, who thought angrily to himself, "That arrogant bastard, he dared to punch me in the face, and now he speaks with such insolence? I've wanted to get back at him. This is the perfect opportunity." Erwin raised his sword with intense malice and accepted the duel, vowing internally that he would inflict irreversible harm on Damien and then take his sister Louise. A crowd gathered in the estate's courtyard to witness the duel that was about to begin between Damien and Erwin. Worry was clearly visible on the faces of Damien's father and mother. His mother nervously asked if they should stop the duel, but the father noted that Damien's confidence might mean he had a plan. Otherwise, all they could do was pray for a miracle. However, Abel internally disagreed with his father, firmly believing that they couldn't rely on miracles, while Erwin was preparing with full concentration for the duel. Erwin stood confidently in the dueling area, showing off his swordsmanship with flair, which made Abel believe that Damien's chances of winning were non-existent, since he was up against a professional knight. Damien stood before Erwin unarmed, prompting Erwin to mockingly ask how he intended to fight without a weapon. Damien replied with absolute confidence, pulling out a small dining fork and saying, "No need to worry." A confident smile spread across Damien's face as he waved the fork in front of his opponent, declaring it more than enough to face him. Shock swept through all the spectators when they saw Damien preparing for the duel with nothing but a dining fork. Erwin burst into laughter, clearly mocking Damien's weapon choice and sarcastically asking if fear had driven him insane. Nonetheless, Erwin lunged at Damien at great speed, declaring that he would not hold back, despite what he saw as a foolish joke. Damien easily and swiftly dodged the first strike, which deeply surprised Erwin. Frustrated by Damien's successful evasion, Erwin decided to unleash a powerful technique from the Lion's Roar combat style. He attacked Damien using the Lion's Roar sword style, creating a powerful and terrifying aura shaped like a glowing lion made of energy. The attack destroyed part of the courtyard with tremendous force, sending dust flying everywhere. But Damien emerged from the smoke without a single visible injury, causing widespread shock among the onlookers. Erwin's guards were stunned, silently wondering how Damien managed to withstand Erwin's technique without even being armed. Erwin himself began to feel anxious. Damien had dodged all of his strikes with astonishing speed in such a short time. A confident smile appeared on Damien's face as he silently affirmed that, thanks to his recent training, he now fully understood the dueling style of the Leonblum family. He clearly recalled that, in his previous life, he had fought Michael Leonblum, Erwin's older brother, and had nearly defeated him. Damien looked at Erwin with a confident gaze and told himself that Erwin's sword style had far more weaknesses compared to that of his older brother. Erwin unleashed a massive wave of aura energy, daring Damien to dodge this next strike as well. Damien immediately recognized the danger upon seeing the sheer strength of the aura and admitted internally that it might be difficult to evade such an attack using only a fork. He made a quick decision to use the Hero Saint technique, a secret skill he had learned in the past. The clash of Erwin's and Damien's powers created an enormous explosion of energy in the middle of the dueling ground. Louise and Abel watched the scene with deep concern and tension while the fight continued before their eyes. Erwin's weapon clashed with Damien's fork in a sudden, shocking moment that left Erwin visibly stunned. With exceptional skill, Damien managed to dodge Erwin's attack, using only the fork, in a clever and unexpected way. Damien confidently declared to himself that he had used a secret special technique called Secret Art, Perception of the Infinite Current, which allowed him to evade Erwin's attacks with ease. Suddenly, Damien surged forward at incredible speed, launching a decisive strike at Erwin while bidding him farewell in his mind. Goodbye. Damien's fork struck Erwin's neck with precise accuracy, sending him into a panic and shocking disbelief. All those present were left speechless, especially Damien's parents, Abel and Louise, none of whom had expected such an outcome. Erwin was horrified when he realized that the fork was placed directly against his neck, causing him to immediately retreat in utter fear. He collapsed to the ground in a panic, crying out in pain and humiliation. Damien stood tall and confident, thinking to himself that despite all his anger and desire to kill Erwin, he had chosen to restrain himself for the sake of his family. He looked down at Erwin, lying on the ground, and said firmly and calmly, "It's clear now that I've won. Do you have any complaints?" Damien stepped closer to the frightened Erwin and spoke with unwavering authority. "As I said before, you're leaving this place immediately." Damien stood proudly, directing one final, decisive command at Erwin. "Leave, now." Later, the family gathered around the dining table in an atmosphere of heavy silence and tension. After finishing his meal, Damien stood up quietly and announced in a calm tone that he was going to resume his morning training. The rest of the family remained seated in quiet worry as Damien silently left the room. The mother turned to her husband with anxious eyes and asked whether he was going to speak to Damien about what happened the previous day. Abel began to speak, expressing his amazement at how drastically Damien's behavior had changed and how different he now seemed from the brother they once knew. The father concluded the discussion with quiet wisdom, saying they should wait and let Damien speak for himself when he was ready. The mother looked at her husband with affection, trying to comfort him and encourage him to stay strong through these difficult circumstances. Meanwhile, the father thought to himself that, in truth, he didn't even want to know what had happened, because although he loved Damien, he now found him terrifying. Damien sat alone in the hallway, preparing himself by strapping on weighted sandbags for physical training. Suddenly, Louise called out to him in a clear voice as she approached quickly. Damien paused and turned toward her, waiting to hear what she had to say. Louise smiled gently and told him that she was relieved he hadn't left yet, admitting she had been hesitant to talk to him about what happened the day before. Damien suddenly remembered that he needed to apologize to her for his actions, and sincerely expressed regret for acting so rashly and possibly embarrassing her. But Louise immediately interrupted him and said that it wasn't like that at all, trying to stop him from blaming himself. She stepped closer to Damien and thanked him with a warm, genuine smile for what he had done for her. Louise quietly admitted to herself that she had been terrified when she agreed to follow Erwin, and that deep down, she never wanted to do it. Damien was moved by Louise's words, thinking to himself that he had known she must have felt that way. And in that moment, he realized just how important his actions had been for her. In that moment, Louise recalled everything that had happened earlier, how Damien had stood up to Erwin, and realized she wanted to express her deep gratitude to her brother. She smiled sincerely, a warm expression full of gratitude, as she wholeheartedly thanked Damien for what he had done for her. Damien paused, smiling, then told her that he was the one who should be thankful to her. He looked at his sister with deep affection and appreciation, telling her that he had always felt grateful for her. Louise was surprised by Damien's words, but just as he was about to leave, she stopped him, saying she had something important to give him. Louise revealed a distinctive sword to Damien, and told him with a gentle smile that it was the only sword their father had ever crafted especially for him, and he had asked her to give it to him so he could use it in his training. She explained that their father, even if he didn't always show it, loved and valued Damien deeply, and had asked her to make sure he knew that. Then, in a serious tone mimicking their father's style, Louise warned Damien that as the heir to the Viscount, he should never use a fork instead of a sword again. Damien grasped the sword with clear confidence, raising it high with pride, feeling honored to receive such a meaningful gift. Elsewhere, their father suddenly sneezed unexpectedly. He began to wonder why he felt a sudden chill and shiver, puzzled by the strange sensation. Outside the manor, a dark and eerie atmosphere began to form as an ominous, shadowy energy crept silently toward the house. The guards stationed outside, bored and inattentive, failed to notice the strange energy gradually closing in around them. But suddenly, one of the guards felt that something unnatural was happening. He began looking around anxiously and nervously. At that moment, the dark energy began to take form before him, leaving him confused and unsettled. The guard was horrified by the strange sight before him and screamed in terror. Then, from within the shadows, a figure began to emerge and approach him. Out of the dark energy, a frightening and mysterious figure took shape and appeared clearly at the main gate. The sinister force slipped silently into the house, unnoticed by anyone. Inside the mansion, everyone was sound asleep, completely unaware of the events unfolding around them. The dark, shadowy figure crept quietly toward Louise's room, where she still lay fast asleep. Now the terrifying man's face came into view. He smiled wickedly, admiring the sleeping Louise, and remarked that although he had come on another mission related to the Black Serpent Gang, finding Louise was an unexpected bonus. He extended his hand toward the deeply sleeping Louise with a clear intent to harm her. But just then, he was startled by a voice behind him calling out, "Hey!" The mysterious man turned around in surprise to see Damien standing in the doorway, calmly asking him what he was doing there. Damien addressed the stranger with composed confidence, stating that he had sensed a strange energy in the area and then sarcastically asked, "Is there a stranger here by any chance?" The shadowy man was visibly shaken, inwardly questioning how Damien had managed to stay awake even after he had used strong magic to put everyone to sleep. He launched a high-speed assault, casting a powerful dark spell toward Damien. But Damien effortlessly dodged the spell with extreme agility and skill. Shocked, the mysterious man cried out in frustration and confusion, "Who the hell are you?" Damien responded calmly and confidently as he faced the man, "That's a question you should be asking yourself. This is my home after all." Then he asked the intruder who he was, and what exactly he intended to do to his sister. The mysterious man grew irritated the moment he heard the anxious voices of the guards, wondering aloud about the sound they had heard near Louise's room. He quickly realized that the guards were approaching, and their presence clearly unsettled and annoyed him. Determining that it would be troublesome if the guards discovered him, the mysterious man prepared to act swiftly and vanish from their sight. He immediately cast black magic to escape the room just before the guards could arrive. The man retreated through the window, vanishing at astonishing speed using his dark sorcery. A trace of dark energy lingered in the air as he disappeared from the room. Damien rushed to the window, wondering to himself whether he had lost track of the mysterious man. He was suddenly startled by an eerie and unsettling energy approaching him from just beyond the window. Meanwhile, outside the manor, people began to feel a strange sense of unease. Something unnatural was happening. The castle staff at the stables were shocked to find a major problem and were left deeply confused, unsure of what to do. They discovered that the prized horse had suddenly died, increasing their fear and anxiety over how the Viscount might react. The servants asked in distress how such a disaster could have occurred, especially since the horse had been perfectly fine just yesterday. Damien suddenly appeared among them and clearly stated that this couldn't possibly be a matter of simple misfortune. He reassured the servants not to panic and clarified that he hadn't come to blame them for what had happened. Instead, he calmly asked them to step away for a while so that he could investigate the matter personally. Damien reached out and carefully examined the horse's body with focused attention. After inspecting it, he realized that the incident was connected to the same energy he had sensed from the mysterious man the night before. He became certain that the terrifying aura he felt was unmistakably black magic. Damien immediately understood that the person he had encountered last night was a dark sorcerer, intensifying his concern. At that same moment, the Haxon family remained peacefully asleep, completely unaware of what was happening around them. Damien felt a deep sense of responsibility and worry for his family's safety, knowing that they could be in danger from this dark sorcerer. The sorcerer's shadowy energy began spreading quickly from the stables, retreating toward an unknown destination. That dark trace led directly to a hidden cave in the forest near the estate. Inside the cave, the mysterious man stood speaking to himself, pleased with what he had accomplished so far. He mocked the leader of the Black Serpent gang, amused that he had successfully deceived him, pretending the requested material was a curse when it was actually something mundane. The dark sorcerer realized that with the large quantity of supplies he had obtained, he wouldn't need to worry about gathering more for quite some time. Still, he couldn't help but feel some bitterness over his situation, having to complete petty tasks just to earn a bit of money because of being hunted by the organization. He understood that he had to remain hidden for a while due to recent events. Just as the sorcerer was preparing to leave, he froze when he heard Damien's voice suddenly comment that he had smelled something rotten, which instantly caught his attention and surprised him. The sorcerer's expression shifted as he turned toward the source of the voice, and then heard Damien continue, saying that the smell indicated an old man had been living alone here for a long time without properly ventilating the place. The dark sorcerer stepped back in clear astonishment when he saw Damien standing calmly before him, realizing that this young man was the eldest son of Viscount Haxon. A confident smile appeared on Damien's face, affirming to the dark sorcerer that he was indeed the eldest son of the Haxon family, the same one who confronted him the previous night. The dark sorcerer, deeply anxious, wondered how Damien had managed to find this place, and Damien replied calmly and mockingly that he had followed the foul stench the sorcerer had left behind. The sorcerer told Damien that he had heard of his bravery in facing the Black Serpent gang, and commented that Damien was clearly not just a reckless and ordinary person. The sorcerer admitted that he had been cautious and prepared from the start, as he never knew when Damien might appear. He explained that the Black Serpent gang had instructed him to inflict as much damage as possible on the Haxon family. Damien smiled calmly with clear mockery and told the sorcerer that he was a pathetic man for accepting a mission that would inevitably lead him to death soon. The dark sorcerer was shocked by Damien's words and responded with intense anger and agitation. Because of what he said? The sorcerer grew furious and began unleashing his magical power, declaring that he would enjoy torturing Damien and relieving his boredom with him, since Damien was such an interesting individual. Damien prepared for battle, gripping his sword with complete confidence, and told the dark sorcerer calmly that despite his vow not to kill anyone in this life, there was one exception: vile individuals like the dark sorcerer. A look of anger and menace appeared clearly on Damien's face, and he firmly declared to the sorcerer that he despised people like him, dark sorcerers who toyed with others' lives. The sorcerer was stunned when he realized that Damien had managed to uncover his identity as a dark sorcerer with such speed and ease, and he admitted that Damien was by no means an ordinary person. Enraged, the sorcerer launched a massive wave of destructive black energy, shouting threats at Damien. If he escapes, the sorcerer will be in big trouble, so he must die now. Damien charged toward the sorcerer with high confidence, swiftly and skillfully dodging his powerful and dangerous attack. The sorcerer was shocked by Damien's unexpected speed, which caused him to falter momentarily during the fight. Damien struck with overwhelming force, landing a direct blow with his sword on the sorcerer, who struggled greatly to block it. The sorcerer staggered back, groaning in pain. But suddenly his wounds began healing at an astonishing speed due to the power of his dark magic. Damien watched in great surprise as the sorcerer regenerated his wounds at a rapid rate, realizing it was the same ability he had noticed earlier in the palace. At that moment, Damien understood that his opponent was no ordinary person at all, but someone with exceptional abilities beyond expectations. The sorcerer smiled with terrifying confidence and mocked Damien, telling him that his earlier attack had had little to no effect. Damien charged with even greater force, threatening the sorcerer that he would tear him to pieces until nothing remained but dust. Damien launched a powerful assault, landing hits on the sorcerer in multiple areas. The sorcerer stepped back slightly after Damien's last attack and said with a mocking smile that Damien's skill was truly interesting, but it would not be enough to defeat him. The sorcerer suddenly paused and spoke in a low voice to Damien, telling him that the moment he entered this place, he had already become a dead man. Damien was struck with sudden shock when he saw that he was surrounded by extremely powerful and terrifying magical traps from all directions. The sorcerer told him confidently that he had set up these traps in advance, in case the organization pursued him, and that Damien had now fallen right into them. Damien realized the severity of the situation he was in, and understood that these traps could be extremely dangerous for him. The dark sorcerer began mocking him, saying that Damien would greatly regret challenging someone of his high status in the world of dark magic. The dark sorcerer unleashed his most powerful spell, confidently declaring that Damien would die slowly and painfully as his body decayed. A look of defiance and determination appeared in Damien's eyes, and he began preparing to face this dangerous attack with all his strength and focus. Black energy spread around Damien with overwhelming force, in a scene filled with tension and extreme danger. The dark sorcerer began mocking Damien, calling him an arrogant boy who had rushed straight toward his own death. He continued speaking with a cunning smile, explaining that the more damage he caused, the greater the financial reward he would receive from the Black Serpent gang. After believing he had eliminated Damien, the sorcerer expressed relief and said that he could now search for the girl he had seen the previous night. But Damien's voice suddenly interrupted him, sarcastically commenting on the type of spell the sorcerer had used, clarifying that it was a form of decay magic. The sorcerer was greatly surprised to see Damien still standing firmly before him after everything he had been through. He asked in clear confusion how Damien could know such things about dark magic. Damien responded with a mysterious smile. Who knows? At that moment, Damien realized within himself that he still possessed that power, or authority, which he had thought he lost after returning through time. A terrifying image of Dorgos appeared in Damien's memory, and he recalled that this power he now held was called the authority of the rulers. Damien clearly remembered Dorgos, who had granted him this power in his previous life, and he recognized just how dangerous the situation was now. In his memory, Dorgos was addressing him with the title, Beloved Knight of Death, while Damien knelt submissively before him. The sorcerer in Damien's memory continued speaking about granting him a powerful body and great magic, yet told him that even this was not enough. The mysterious sorcerer from the past went on to explain that he had given Damien this additional power to transform him into the ultimate weapon and embodiment of pure evil. Dorgos had bestowed a massive additional power in that memory, aiming to turn Damien into the strongest weapon imaginable. The sorcerer let out a wicked laugh, feeling proud of his work. In a majestic scene, an immense force of black energy surged forth as a result of the sorcerer's ritual. The sorcerer stood in awe of his authority and power, proclaiming that this force was power granted directly by the gods. The mysterious sorcerer unleashed his energy with full force and concentration, trying to complete the ritual in its entirety. At that moment, the effect of the black energy appeared immense and overwhelmingly powerful, as if it were swallowing everything around it. Dorgos realized with intensity and madness the sheer magnitude and danger of the energy he had released. The power of Dorgos began to permeate Damien's body, affecting him in a violent and extremely painful way. Damien screamed in agony as he received this tremendous power granted to him by the sorcerer. The black energy exploded around Damien in a scene that conveyed the gravity of the moment and the magnitude of the power he had received. Afterward, the sorcerer declared with joy and madness that he had finally obtained what he desired. A frightening look of joy appeared in the sorcerer's eyes as he confirmed that he had acquired the terrifying power he had always sought. The dreadful power manifested in a majestic form around Damien's body, creating a palpable sense of awe in the place. Damien looked in astonishment at his new power, wondering how this force had remained with him even after his return through time. At that moment, a massive force of energy suddenly struck the sorcerer, intensifying the tension of the events. Damien responded with an extremely swift and precise movement, dodging the powerful attack launched at him by the sorcerer. The sorcerer was shocked by Damien's resilience and angrily asked how he had survived his powerful magic. But Damien replied calmly and with sarcasm, asking, "Doesn't everyone have a secret weapon hidden away?" Fully prepared for the confrontation with unwavering confidence, Damien suddenly realized something important as he recalled the dark sorcerer's words, how the sorcerer had mentioned earlier that he was one of the high-ranking members of the Yolan group. Damien began remembering what he knew about the Yolan group and how it was a specialized organization in assassinations using dark magic. He became certain that the sorcerer's skills were far from ordinary due to his dangerous expertise in dark magic, explaining his overwhelming power. The sorcerer started to suspect that Damien possessed a special kind of secret weapon and realized he'd be in serious trouble if the battle dragged on. He had to end it immediately. He revealed a magical bracelet, telling Damien that he had originally kept it reserved for the church, but now he was forced to use it in this confrontation. The bracelet began to emit a glowing green magical energy, which quickly spread over the sorcerer's arm. Magical energy surged from the sorcerer's body as he began drawing on the latent power stored in the bracelet. The sorcerer's features shifted drastically as the bracelet took effect, his expression now filled with confidence and strength. A massive surge of dark energy erupted from the bracelet, astonishing Damien as he witnessed the sheer force it released. Damien quickly concluded that this bracelet was a special magical artifact designed to store and conceal the immense magical energy possessed by the sorcerer. A huge monstrous form of dark energy appeared before Damien, and the sorcerer confidently told him that this power was impossible to resist. With intense fury, the dark sorcerer unleashed his most powerful spell, shouting at Damien to burn in hellfire and die. The dark energy burst violently toward Damien, causing an immense explosion. The violent attack created a massive crater of dark energy, and the sorcerer believed that the battle had finally ended in his favor. He smirked wickedly, claiming that Damien was now trapped in the fires of hell and would remain burning forever. But Damien's voice interrupted him calmly, telling him he was gravely mistaken about something. The sorcerer was deeply shocked when Damien told him that the authority of greed he possessed was not the kind that simply blocks magical spells. Damien manifested before the sorcerer, surrounded by a mysterious energy that shielded him, a powerful aura encasing him. The intense aura spread throughout the area, causing all dark magic to vanish. Damien declared confidently that this energy absorbs all types of dark energy, putting the sorcerer in an extremely disadvantageous position. The sorcerer was stunned by Damien's mysterious ability and began to panic, questioning the nature of this authority and how Damien had obtained such power. Damien responded mockingly, telling the sorcerer it was none of his business and that he could simply consider it as Damien having far superior equipment. Damien prepared for an attack, visibly frustrated that he was forced to use a power granted by the one he hated more than anyone else. He realized he had no choice but to rely on the skills of the Knight of Death if he wanted to defeat the sorcerer in front of him. The sorcerer was greatly surprised when he saw Damien using a powerful technique called Aura Blade, a skill used only by professional swordmasters. He was struck with fear and shock at the power Damien wielded and begged him to wait a moment, overwhelmed with panic. But Damien charged forward without hesitation, unleashing a devastating strike with his sword, using the full force of the Aura Blade. The sorcerer's face showed pure astonishment and terror as he watched the powerful attack hurtling toward him. The sorcerer was struck by Damien's attack without even being able to defend himself. A massive force exploded from Damien's destructive blow, causing widespread devastation in the area. Damien stood confidently after the attack, surrounded by a powerful aura that confirmed his victory in this fierce clash. The dark sorcerer began coughing violently as he struggled to rise from the rubble that had collapsed on him due to the previous attack. Damien approached the dark sorcerer and calmly told him that if he spoke before dying, he would ease his pain and suffering. Damien asked the sorcerer about the location of the Black Serpent Gang's hideout, pointing his sword at him in a clear and threatening manner. On the following morning, a carriage arrived at the landmark of Trade City, amidst a calm and stable atmosphere. Victor, the servant who accompanied Damien, asked what his young master intended to do in the city's landmark again, showing a mix of curiosity and concern. Damien smiled quietly as he told Victor, his loyal servant, that if he chose to follow him, he should do so without asking too many questions. Victor felt uneasy and remarked that, while Damien's expression was calm, the book he was reading had an ominous and disturbing aura. Curiously, Victor asked what Damien was reading with such intense focus. Damien replied with a mysterious smile that it was a very special book. Damien went on to say that it was a book of dark magic he had recently obtained after defeating the dark sorcerer the night before. Victor responded with intense anxiety, explaining that while he knew little, he understood very well the danger of dark magic books and how difficult they were to acquire. Victor suddenly paused when he noticed a strange and unpleasant smell in the area, which caught his attention and concern. A look of surprise appeared on Victor's face as he wondered about the source of that strange and unsettling smell. Damien announced that they had arrived at the location he intended, and he stepped out of the carriage holding a mysterious sack in his hand. He told Victor firmly and clearly that there was something important he needed to do from now on, as he handed him the mysterious sack. When Victor asked, clearly worried about the contents of the sack, Damien answered with complete calm that it contained a human head. Victor was deeply shocked and told Damien nervously that such a thing was no joke, even if he were ignorant. Horror and intense fear appeared on Victor's face as he confirmed the horrific contents of the sack. Victor screamed in shock and terror while Damien held up a human head in front of him, showing no apparent concern. Damien tried to calm the panicked Victor and told him seriously to stay calm, as everyone in this public place was watching them. He promised Victor he would explain the details later, but for now, the important thing was for Victor to carry out a specific task. Damien handed Victor the sack and the head, clearly instructing him to deliver them to the designated location he had previously told him about. Damien arrived in front of a large headquarters in the center of the city and commented sarcastically that the gang had chosen a rather prominent and central location for their base. He confidently approached the gang guards outside the headquarters, making a remark about the luxury of the place and how comfortable their lives seemed to be. The gang's guards angrily questioned who this young man was who was approaching them with such confidence. Damien told them clearly and calmly that he was Damien Haxon of the Viscount Haxon family. One of the guards mocked the name Haxon, saying it reminded him of pig's feet and that using his full name like that was hilarious. Suddenly, one of the guards stopped and showed signs of concern and confusion as he recalled something important their gang leader had previously mentioned. Damien smiled with clear confidence and told them it seemed they knew exactly who he was and that he had important business with their boss, so they should step aside. The guards suddenly stepped back with unexpected compliance and allowed Damien to pass without any resistance, which surprised him slightly. Suddenly, one of the guards launched a warning flare into the sky to alert everyone inside the headquarters that a dangerous intruder was approaching. Damien lifted his head toward the sky as he watched the warning flare being fired, fully realizing the gravity of what was about to happen. A mocking smile appeared on the face of one of the gang members as he told Damien that he never intended to let him in so easily. At that moment, a group of gang members began appearing quickly, heading straight toward Damien. Damien questioned what they had just done, and his expression shifted to seriousness and anger. While the man responded that this was just a welcoming gift from the gang's boss, the gang members advanced, surrounding Damien, who faced them with complete confidence and told them they would regret this. Elsewhere in the city, Governor Sebastian Baker was seated, celebrating and thanking the gang leader Cedric for his hospitality. Meanwhile, City Guard Knight Robert requested more drink, appearing clearly relaxed. Governor Sebastian chatted with his guests, smiling, and told them he was pleased they were enjoying themselves and hoped they would visit him more often. Governor Sebastian told Cedric that he believed the Black Serpent Gang could handle all the city's other operations without issue. He continued, saying he would be happy if the gang managed the entire entertainment district of the city. The governor confidently stated that he could easily silence any objections from others using his authority. Knight Robert told the governor that he felt bad for not being able to offer anything in return. The governor replied appreciatively that it was enough that Robert protected the city. Cedric smiled and commented on Robert's humility, saying that maintaining security in such a large city was no easy task. Robert showed clear modesty, feeling shy at Cedric's praise. The governor continued to joke with his guests, saying that if they ever needed anything, they should simply ask, and he would do his utmost to help. While Cedric continued his polite conversation, he was secretly planning something else, and felt nothing but contempt for his guests. Cedric revealed internally his sinister intentions, explaining that once the Black Serpent gang took full control of the city, everyone would be under his rule. A crazed and terrifying expression appeared on Cedric's face as he confirmed to himself that, in the end, they would all bow before him. The governor's grin widened into something mad and frightening as he imagined his wicked plans soon coming to fruition. Suddenly, one of the men burst in shouting, "Boss!" in alarm, startling everyone in the room. Cedric became angry at the man's sudden entrance and asked him what was going on. The man apologized for the unexpected interruption. Cedric then left the room with the man, ordering him to explain immediately what had happened without delay. The man began informing Cedric in a low and anxious voice, causing visible tension on the governor's face. Knight Robert was greatly shocked when he heard the name Damien Haxon mentioned, his expression clearly reflecting his disbelief. Cedric was filled with rage, wondering to himself what the dark sorcerer had been doing, though he felt reassured knowing he had warned his men in advance. Cedric tried to reassure the man and told him to leave calmly, saying there was no need to worry, because Damien had already dug his own grave. Meanwhile, the gang members had surrounded Damien from all sides, believing that he had walked right into his own death. Without hesitation, Damien launched into an attack, drinking a vial of elixir, and as soon as he threw it to the ground, he released his energy and prepared for a fierce confrontation. Damien's eyes glowed with extraordinary power as he began moving at high speed to strike the surrounding gang members. He attacked with ferocity and astounding strength, throwing his enemies aside with complete confidence and determination. At that moment, a mysterious figure cloaked in dark robes appeared, walking calmly and confidently toward the battlefield. This mysterious person stepped forward and spoke with inner certainty, saying there was no need to worry. He had someone he could count on in this difficult situation. Shock and terror were clearly etched across Cedric's face, the gang leader, as he observed what was happening outside, rendering him completely speechless. Cedric quickly climbed up to the high balcony to see for himself what was going on below, expecting it to be something minor or insignificant. But he was completely stunned when he saw all his gang members collapsed on the ground, groaning in pain, while Damien stood alone in the center, completely unharmed. A look of disbelief and astonishment spread across Cedric's face as he witnessed Damien standing tall and alone after defeating all his men. Cedric turned to one of his men with suspicion, asking if that young man really was Damien Haxon. The man confirmed nervously and clearly. Cedric was shocked by what he heard and recalled what had been said about Damien earlier. He had assumed Damien was nothing more than a useless heir with no real skills or abilities. Cedric's expression shifted to pure panic as he wondered if the dark sorcerer he had sent had truly been defeated by Damien. He rushed back inside, feeling the urgent need to call for help due to the gravity of the situation he had never anticipated. At that moment, Damien noticed something strange and massive heading toward him at extreme speed and force, immediately catching his attention and raising his guard. He realized that the object coming at him was magical in nature, confirming the seriousness of the situation. 3 of Cedric's men appeared atop the building, aiming a massive magical weapon at Damien, challenging him to withstand such immense power. The 3 men unleashed a colossal wave of flames toward Damien, which spread rapidly and caused a powerful explosion at the site. Despite the huge explosion, Damien stood his ground firmly, deflecting the flames with his sword without being harmed. One of the gang members shouted mockingly at Damien, telling him it was insane to think a mere sword could withstand such a large-scale fire attack. But Damien responded forcefully, using a secret technique called Infinite Insight to face the flames and charge directly at the gang members. One of the men's eyes widened in sheer horror as he watched the flames he had launched rebound rapidly toward him. A massive explosion rocked the area as the flames reversed and hit the gang members, destroying a large portion of the site. Damien stood tall and confident after the attack, looking around sarcastically, wondering if it was finally over. He quickly turned, saying to himself that it was time to uncover the truth about Cedric, the leader of the Black Serpent gang. Suddenly, Damien sensed a strange and dangerous energy coming from above, prompting him to turn sharply in anticipation of the next threat. A massive figure leaped down with immense force, delivering a crushing blow toward Damien, who was forced to retreat swiftly to evade the attack. The mysterious man with the powerful aura landed on the ground. His aura was so intense that it made Damien's skin tingle from the sheer pressure of his presence. The mysterious man spoke mockingly in a deep voice, saying he had been wondering who was causing all this chaos, as smoke and dust swirled around him. Damien realized that the man he now faced was an official knight with highly advanced and powerful combat skills, making the situation even more dangerous. At that moment, the city's armored soldiers began surrounding Damien from all sides, aiming their weapons at him. Sebastian appeared, shouting furiously, directing his accusations at Damien and blaming him for causing chaos in the city center. The man declared himself to be Sebastian Baker, governor of the city, and announced that he would personally punish Damien. But Damien met his threat with calmness and simply asked, "Why would you punish me?" pretending not to understand the accusation. Sebastian became enraged by Damien's calm response and began scolding him, saying he had not only attacked Cedric, a respected businessman, but also harmed many innocent people in the city. Cedric, watching the situation unfold from the background, smiled wickedly as Sebastian continued speaking, describing Damien's actions as a crime that could never be forgiven. Damien stood before Cedric, the leader of the Black Serpent gang, and began to speak mockingly, saying that he had finally managed to find him, then asked him to come closer so they could start the conversation with a punch. Damien continued his speech with a mocking smile, saying that he had expected a connection between the Black Serpent gang and the city authorities, but he hadn't expected that connection to be so weak, expressing his surprise that Cedric was being described as an honest merchant. The governor exploded with anger and said that if Damien asked for forgiveness now, perhaps his punishment would be lessened. But Damien calmly replied that asking for forgiveness required one to be guilty in the first place. This greatly enraged the governor. The governor then turned to Sir Robert and said sternly that he had tried to reason with Damien due to his young age, but since he didn't respond, he shouldn't blame him for what would happen next. At that moment, Robert stepped forward toward Damien, raising his massive weapon in preparation for battle, while Damien stood firm in front of him, showing no fear. Robert began speaking confidently, declaring himself the Knight Protector of this city and ordering Damien to drop his weapon and surrender immediately, while Damien remained calm and defiant. Robert noticed with concern that Damien was showing no fear despite the clear threats, and he wondered to himself whether Damien was brave or simply a fool. But Damien responded with full confidence, saying that he was simply self-assured, which only piqued Robert's interest further. Robert launched an attack on Damien with great speed and force, using his massive weapon, but Damien managed to evade the blow, which ended up shattering the ground beneath them. Damien felt Robert's immense strength and realized that he wouldn't be easy to deal with, something he had anticipated from the start. Damien decided internally that he had to hold on until the help he was waiting for arrived, and he tried to remain firm despite the intensity of the attacks. Damien and Robert exchanged strong and rapid blows, filling the battlefield with the violent clashing sounds of weapons colliding. Damien struggled to comprehend that even after fully blocking Robert's strike, its power was still extremely overwhelming. Visible injuries began to appear on Damien's arm due to the force of the attacks, making him concerned about how long he could keep this up. Damien was caught off guard by a sudden and very close strike from Robert, making him realize how dangerous the situation had become. Robert mocked Damien, asking him what had been occupying his mind during the fight, to the extent that such a surprise attack could catch him off guard. Damien quickly realized that Robert was incredibly fast and frighteningly strong, which made the confrontation even more difficult. Robert continued delivering fierce blows toward Damien, trying to eliminate him completely, while Damien struggled to hold his ground and defend himself. Someone arrived and blocked the attack directed at Damien, then knocked Robert's weapon away. Cedric and his soldiers were utterly shocked by this person's overwhelming strength, and deep concern appeared on their faces, fearing things might escalate for the worse. Robert suddenly realized that another person had intervened in the battle and helped Damien, and he shouted, demanding that this mysterious individual reveal their identity. Suddenly, a holy knight appeared, her energy radiating powerfully as she stood with unmistakable confidence in the battlefield. Robert was deeply shocked as he watched this holy knight, anxiously wondering why a church knight would be here in this place. Damien turned toward the holy knight who had arrived late and calmly asked her why she had taken so long to show up. At that moment, Victor arrived on the scene, enthusiastically declaring that he had finally returned. Victor stood there extremely happy, announcing his arrival with great excitement and a broad, cheerful smile on his face. Cedric grew very anxious when he saw the holy knight on the battlefield, realizing that the church's involvement in this case would be extremely dangerous for him. The Holy Knight appeared standing with absolute confidence, accompanied by her attendants from the church, which filled Cedric with terror that the church might have discovered his actions and his alliance with the dark sorcerer. Victor approached Damien eagerly and asked if he was all right, and Damien responded with dry sarcasm that he was definitely not all right. He nearly turned into a skeleton from all the waiting. As Damien looked toward the Holy Knight, he realized that everything was going exactly as he had planned, and that her presence here would ensure a highly favorable outcome for him. A wide, enthusiastic smile appeared on Victor's face as he excitedly said that, although he might not be skilled at everything, he was certainly exceptional at carrying out quick missions. Several hours earlier, a large church stood very quietly under a clear sky. It seemed it would soon become the center of important upcoming events. Inside the church, several individuals in gray cloaks sat in silent, devout prayer, while a shadowy figure stood quietly behind them. A young nun inside the church sat praying in deep calm, but suddenly felt something that made her cautiously turn around. Victor entered the church, gasping heavily from exhaustion, and hesitantly asked if this was the Sacred Branch Church. The nun calmly confirmed that it was, and asked him what he needed, waiting in anticipation. Victor quickly told her that his young master had ordered him to deliver something extremely important to the church as quickly as possible. He explained nervously that what he carried was evidence that someone in the city was cooperating with a dark sorcerer, which clearly alarmed the nun. Shock and worry appeared on the nun's face upon hearing that Victor carried evidence related to dark magic. She asked Victor to show her the notebook he had brought, as she seemed to expect something dangerous within its contents. The nun quickly noticed that the notebook emitted a faint aura of dark magic, which immediately confirmed her suspicions. She then observed a strange and suspicious symbol on the notebook, which further deepened her concern and surprise. Suddenly, the nun noticed another bag Victor was carrying, which aroused her curiosity about its contents. A human head fell out of the bag, landing right in front of Victor and the nun, leaving both of them in absolute shock and horror. The nun stared intently at the head and instantly realized that she had finally found clear evidence of the involvement of Ajito, one of the high-ranking officers in the Yolan organization. The nun was filled with anger and determination. She quickly stood and demanded to know who had delivered the notebook to the church. The nun arrived at the scene and fixed her gaze intently on Damien, asking if he was truly Damien Haxon. Damien confirmed his identity as he stood beside Victor, waiting for her next response. The nun informed Damien that the church had received the evidence he sent, and from now on, the church would take over handling the matter directly. Damien promptly declared that he would never interfere with the church's duties and gave his immediate consent to whatever decision they deemed appropriate, especially regarding Cedric Sebastian. The nun expressed her gratitude very politely for the governor's cooperation, bowing slightly in thanks. Damien and Victor realized that everything was unfolding exactly as they had planned, now that the Holy Knight from the church had intervened. At that moment, the nun began explaining to everyone that the Holy Church lives to serve the Lord and is deeply devoted to its sacred duties. She added that to ordinary people, the church always represents kindness and mercy. But she continued seriously, explaining that when it comes to punishing heretics and demons, the church never hesitates to show its strength and severity. She clarified that the elite force tasked with carrying out these punishments is the Holy Knights, who are the strongest and most capable within the church. Damien felt relieved as he realized that the Holy Knights now stood on his side. The Holy Knight raised her voice firmly, declaring to the soldiers and citizens that the church had received confirmed information about someone in the city collaborating with a dangerous dark sorcerer. The citizens began speaking anxiously among themselves, wondering in shock who could possibly be involved with dark sorcerers, expressing deep disgust. The Holy Knight solemnly announced that the church would take direct control over the city's affairs until the culprits were identified and punished. However, Sebastian began to object to the knight's words, saying that he was the governor of this city and that it should remain under his authority. The Holy Knight stood firmly before Governor Sebastian and the gathered crowd, stating that purging the land of the stain of heresy was not merely a duty, but a divine mandate. She made it clear that the authority of the church surpassed that of the kingdom. She gave the governor no chance to object, interrupting him sternly and pointing out that now was not the time for debate, but for holding the one before her accountable for his actions. She confidently declared that both Governor Sebastian and his royal soldiers were among the primary suspects in the case, which caused a wave of unrest among the attendees. She didn't stop there. She pointed directly at Cedric, stating that he was the one who had provided shelter and aid to a dark sorcerer within the city. She then turned again to the governor, explaining that his support of Cedric placed him under suspicion as well. At that moment, Governor Sebastian raised his voice in stunned disbelief, asking if Cedric had truly cooperated with the sorcerer. Cedric responded sharply, denying the accusation and asserting that everything being said against him was slander. But the knight showed no hesitation and calmly told him that he was free to deny as much as he liked. The church possessed irrefutable physical evidence. She raised a small notebook in her hands, stating that its contents detailed his dealings with the sorcerer, including the names of suppliers and meeting locations. At that moment, fear spread across Cedric's face as he cursed the dark sorcerer under his breath, wondering why he had written all of it down in the first place. He then tried to defend himself in front of everyone, insisting that he was innocent of these accusations and that this was all a misunderstanding that could be resolved peacefully. But the knight gave him no room for maneuver and issued clear orders to the soldiers to arrest all those involved, without exception. The arrests began immediately. Cries echoed as Cedric and Sebastian were dragged away by force, some resisting, others pleading. Damien stood in the background, observing the scene, while Sebastian was escorted away, casting a cautious and surprised look at him. Sebastian's gaze locked on Damien, and he wondered internally whether everything that was unfolding now had been meticulously planned. Panic overtook him as he considered that surrendering might mean never making it out alive from the hands of the church. Cedric approached Robert and warned him in a grim tone that the church wouldn't stop at arresting him. They'd fabricate enough charges to eliminate him without trial. Amid the growing tension, a voice called out Robert's name forcefully, making him freeze in place and fall silent for a moment. Then Robert shouted with full force, gathering his energy as a majestic blue aura burst from his body, and he declared his clear intentions. He dashed forward with immense speed, declaring that he would not be taken easily, that he would fight to the end. Cedric laughed from a distance, believing that the chaos had begun, while Damien remained still, watching it all unfold with a cold expression. Robert raised his massive sword and struck the ground in front of him with full force, while the knight prepared to counter him without retreating an inch. Robert was shocked to see that she hadn't moved at all despite the intensity of the strike, his face filled with disbelief. In a single moment, the knight unleashed a blow so fast that Robert couldn't even react. It was enough to shatter his defense completely. Cedric's mouth fell open in genuine shock, while Damien stood still, a faint, hidden smile playing on his lips. The knight raised her hand, now engulfed in blue flames, and proclaimed that anyone who dares to oppose the will of the Lord will face nothing but destruction. A deep, visible wound appeared on Robert's body after the strike, and he collapsed violently to the ground. The knight stood above him with unwavering presence, fully enveloped in a sacred aura, while those around her stood in stunned silence. She then announced in a loud voice that the execution of punishment would take place here, without delay and without mercy. She declared firmly that anyone who dares defy divine law would receive their punishment, regardless of their status or rank. The knight concluded her statement with stern authority, making it clear that what was happening was a direct enactment of the Lord's will, and that mercy would not be granted to those who strayed from the path of righteousness. Cedric lay on the ground, his hands bound, his body slumped in a posture that conveyed utter humiliation after everything had collapsed. Outside, Sebastian was in a hysterical state as he was dragged away by the knights, screaming furiously and demanding his immediate release. Damien and Victor stood watching from a distance, victorious smiles on their faces, murmuring that this was the leader of the Black Serpent gang, despite his appearance that didn't exactly scream danger. Cedric was boiling on the inside, his eyes wide with rage, consumed with fury at the realization that everything that had happened was because of Damien. Then Damien turned toward the Holy Knight and thanked her, saying that thanks to her, the mission had progressed and concluded efficiently. He gave her a thoughtful look and realized, judging by her incredibly pure energy, that she was a member of the Azure Flame Division. Damien recalled the image of the Azure Flame Division, one of the 5 strongest units within the church, known for its relentless severity in purging heresy. This division had a blood-stained reputation, never hesitating to eliminate suspected heretics, even when suspicion was minimal. The knight looked directly at Damien and called his name in a steady voice, praising his role in bringing down one of the senior officers of the Yolan organization. Damien responded calmly to her praise, saying that he had only done what he believed was right. The knight replied that what he had done was no small matter, and because of it, he would not be held responsible for any of the events that occurred in the past few hours. Damien pretended not to fully understand what she meant, a quiet smile playing on his face. She wasn't fooled. She confirmed that she knew very well he had intentionally summoned the church to mask his assault, and that he had played his cards with precision. Damien expressed regret if his plan had caused her any inconvenience, explaining that he was driven to it because that sorcerer had threatened his family. The knight's eyes widened when she heard that a family member had been targeted, concern clearly showing on her face. After a moment of thought, the knight announced that, under these circumstances, he would not face any form of punishment. She continued, saying that the bounty placed on that man's head would be given to Damien in full, without delay. Damien felt a flicker of surprise inside. He hadn't even known there was a bounty, and now he wondered how much it was. A visual display of the bounty amount appeared. 1,000 gold coins, a massive sum, enough to buy property or more. With a light smile, Damien asked whether the reward could be exchanged for something more useful to him. The knight asked him what he specifically wanted, and he replied that he wished to obtain the mana cultivation technique used by the church's knights. Her expression shifted to surprise. She hadn't expected someone strong enough to defeat a dark sorcerer to be asking for a mana cultivation technique. Deep down, Damien recalled his confrontation with the dark sorcerer. He acknowledged that the battle had not been won by his strength, but rather through the intervention of divine energy. He admitted to himself that his future enemies would not grant him that same opportunity, and miracles do not come easily. Thus, he concluded that the only way forward was to strengthen himself through truly effective training methods. He only possessed a basic mana technique, which he had learned earlier in his days as a rookie mercenary, but it was no longer suitable for him. He explained to his companion that he needed a real advanced technique, as what he currently had couldn't push him beyond the beginner's level. The Holy Knight was visibly surprised that Damien had reached this level using only basic techniques. As he spoke, the knight began to observe his inner aura closely, and signs of focused interest appeared on her face. She noticed that his body already contained a significantly large amount of energy, much more than usual for someone his age. She thought to herself that his talent was not limited to strength. It extended to willpower and determination. Then, she told him that she had a better offer than mana cultivation techniques, and Damien's curiosity was instantly piqued. The Holy Knight stood, smiling as she extended her hand forward, offering Damien the opportunity to become a Holy Knight. Damien looked at her silently, his expression serious, while Victor, standing beside him, appeared both shocked and tense at what was happening. Damien clearly refused the knight's offer, telling her he wasn't interested as he took a small step back. Victor, standing next to him, was stunned by his master's rejection of such an offer and whispered to him in confusion, asking why he turned it down after defeating such a powerful individual. The knight's face turned serious as she explained the importance of the Holy Knight title, affirming that this position grants its bearer the authority to punish evil in the name of divine justice. She continued, emphasizing that obtaining such a title is extremely difficult and not easily earned. At that moment, Damien appeared uneasy as he internally admitted that he didn't want to live his life like a dog obedient to the church's orders. He added to himself that he didn't see himself as worthy of God's love or mercy. Damien clearly told the knight that he lacked any qualifications that would make him deserving of divine love, while Victor beside him appeared puzzled. Damien then continued, explaining that all he wanted right now was to wander freely across the world, following the footsteps of those who came before him, without being tied to any organization or authority. The knight lowered her head slightly, her face reflecting contemplation and confusion at what she had just heard from Damien. Then, with sudden enthusiasm, she grabbed Damien's hands and joyfully told him that his words were sacred, deeply moved by what he had said. Internally, Damien questioned nervously whether his approach had actually worked on the knight. The knight explained that, as promised, she would offer him a mana cultivation technique instead of monetary reward, adding with a smile that she would personally welcome him if he ever changed his mind in the future. She then kindly made a small additional request, which Damien accepted with a smile and full understanding. Internally, Damien quietly apologized, vowing never to let such a situation happen again. At that moment, the knight realized they hadn't formally introduced themselves, so she began by saying her name was Agnes, and that she was the top disciple of the Azure Flame Brigade. Damien showed clear signs of surprise when he learned she was the top disciple, then smiled and said it was an honor to meet her. Damien politely requested her permission to move forward with something of personal importance, while Victor stood behind him, visibly exhausted. Knight Agnes agreed, but curiously asked what it was that he intended to pursue. In a new scene, Cedric appeared, turning back cautiously, visibly anxious and unsettled. He looked up to find Damien standing before him with a stern gaze, prompting Cedric to explode in anger, shouting and hurling insults at Damien. Damien attacked Cedric, landing a strong punch to his stomach. Cedric received a powerful blow that sent him crashing to the ground, writhing in pain. Damien looked at him mockingly and remarked that the thick fat in his body had probably protected his bones from worse injury. Then Damien delivered another powerful punch directly to Cedric's face, sending him flying through the air from the sheer force. Cedric landed on the ground, groaning in agony and clearly weak and helpless. Damien then stood, placing his hand on his chest, visibly satisfied and relieved by what had just transpired. Victor approached Damien quietly and asked in a low voice whether it was truly over now. Damien answered briefly while looking off into the distance, calmly affirming that it was indeed over. Elsewhere, inside the home of the Marcus Leonblum family, the family head, Holland, entered in a state of intense panic, calling out for his son. But he found his son hiding in his room, covered and trembling in fear. Erwin then felt afraid when he saw his father. Marquise Holland held his son by the shoulders in a state of shock and anger, questioning what had happened and how his son ended up in such a condition. Erwin, in a state of extreme panic, responded with a trembling voice, explaining that someone had tried to kill him. The boy struggled to continue speaking, and while shaking said that the person who attacked him didn't use a knife, but a fork, leaving his father in disbelief. The Marquis shouted furiously at one of his guards, demanding an explanation of exactly what had happened. The guard hesitated at first as he tried to explain, but the Marquis yelled at him, demanding he speak immediately. The guard then responded clearly, stating that the one who attacked his son was Damien Haxon, the son of Viscount Haxon. In a fit of rage, the Marquis threw a vase from the table to the ground, where it shattered completely upon impact. The Marquis expressed his fury, outraged that someone like Damien would dare do such a thing to his son, accusing him of using vile methods. He then shouted in a voice filled with rage that someone should be sent immediately to the Haxon estate. Continuing with even greater anger, the Marquis ordered that Damien be brought before him like an animal, consumed with furious wrath. The following morning at the Haxon estate, Agnes stepped forward at the entrance and greeted Viscount Haxon. She introduced herself, stating that she was a holy knight from the church, and behind her stood two knights in formal posture. Damien's parents appeared at the door and greeted her with noticeable awkwardness, trying to show respect and welcome. The Viscount was clearly anxious, thinking about the trouble Damien had recently caused, both inside and outside the household. He then explained that Damien had mentioned to him that Agnes would be staying at their home for a while. Agnes confirmed his statement and clarified that her stay was part of an official investigation into heretics, requesting full cooperation from the Haxon family. The Viscount gently expressed his concern about the small size of their home and noted that they might not have a suitable room worthy of her. The Viscount showed signs of gratitude after Agnes presented him with a symbolic gift as a token of the church's appreciation for their cooperation. Agnes thanked him again for allowing the investigation team to operate on their estate, while Damien appeared slightly embarrassed. Damien expressed his surprise at the situation, admitting he hadn't expected her work to involve staying directly in the family's home. Agnes kindly asked Damien if she could look into a separate matter in addition to her official investigation. He asked her about this matter, and Agnes smiled, telling him that she had indeed wanted to speak with him about something that concerned him personally, calling it evangelization. In the next room, Damien's parents stood in a state of shock, wondering what kind of investigation was unfolding before them. They exchanged words expressing their deep confusion at the strange situation, while Damien seemed slightly embarrassed by the misunderstanding. Agnes handed Damien two books, explaining that they contained the mana cultivation technique he had requested and that both had been carefully selected for him. Damien openly asked why he had received two books instead of just one, as he had expected. Agnes explained that one of the books focused on sword techniques, and that she felt providing only the cultivation method wouldn't be enough, so she included the additional book. The two books were clearly displayed, one titled The Sword That Breaks the Tyrant's Power, and the other The Tyrant's Mana Cultivation. Agnes clarified that acquiring these books hadn't been easy, as she had faced intense resistance within the church. She then admitted with a gentle smile that she had to invoke her teacher's personal authority, and assured Damien that the reason they overcame the opposition was because the church truly needed someone like him, the chosen one. She then took his hands once more and asked him if he now had the desire to become a holy knight. But Damien pulled his hands away and apologized to her. Agnes smiled at him, understanding his position, and told him she wouldn't pressure him any further, and that he had complete freedom to reach out to her if he ever changed his mind. Then, a look of tension appeared on Damien's face after Agnes left. Damien stood tense, thinking to himself that Agnes clearly had an obsession with him, especially given her repeated attempts to persuade him to join the Holy Knights. Elsewhere, a hidden cave appeared in the forest, its entrance dark and mysterious. Inside the cave, two men in cloaks were standing and discussing something, with one addressing the other as Señor. One of the men asked his companion if he felt anything strange or suspicious about what was happening, while the other seemed absorbed in investigation. He continued, voicing his concern and pointing out how odd it was that someone like Ajito, one of the leaders of the Yulan organization, was taken down so easily. He acknowledged that Ajito wasn't the strongest in terms of combat, but still questioned how someone like him could lose his life to a mere country noble. His companion admitted he shared the same doubts, but explained that Agnes had not commented on the matter so far. The man suggested they should at least discuss the issue once, but his colleague advised that they finish the current investigation first. Agnes suddenly interrupted them, confidently telling them they could fully trust Damien Haxon. The two men were surprised by her appearance, but listened attentively as she assured them she understood their doubts, yet was certain that Damien had never lied to them. Despite her words, one of them admitted he still couldn't understand how Damien had managed to kill Ajito. Agnes appeared surprised by the question and reminded them that she had already told them how it happened. She stated clearly that Damien simply dodged his opponent's attack and then easily slit his throat. In a flashback moment, Agnes explained that she too had doubted Damien's abilities when she first heard of Ajito's death from Damien's servant. However, she didn't intervene immediately, preferring to observe events in the city first. She described how she had seen Damien face dozens of enemies alone without receiving a single scratch, and defeat them all. She then added that, even more astonishingly, he managed to block a fireball spell and emerged completely unharmed. The two men appeared utterly stunned by her description. They wondered whether such a level of defense was even possible. Agnes affirmed that it was indeed possible, adding that she had heard that a master at the swordmaster level could deflect any attack, even magical ones. She then emphasized that although Damien was not a swordmaster, he undoubtedly possessed exceptional talent that could not be ignored. Agnes continued by explaining the true reason for her presence. She had come to track the Yulin organization, but also wanted to bring Damien to meet her teacher. She then asked the two men to put aside their doubts and focus on the investigation they were currently conducting. They agreed, visibly moved by her words, and resumed their work inside the cave. In a different scene, the legs of a horse could be seen moving swiftly and steadily along a dirt path. It was a scene of a group of knights on horseback, advancing under the banner of House Leonblum. The knights of the Leonblum family moved in an orderly and confident formation toward their destination. One of the knights, a trainee named Ulvis, raised his hands high in excitement, announcing that they had finally arrived. Another knight asked Ulvis about a strange smell in the air, to which his companion Lavender jokingly replied that it was the scent of picnics, something rural folks wouldn't recognize. The leading knight grumbled, asking if either of them had any perfume because the smell of the place was bothering him badly, then ordered them to be quiet. The face of the commanding knight, Gerald of House Leonblum, was shown with an expression of complete seriousness and stern resolve. Jarek and the knights of House Leonblum arrived in front of the Haxon family estate, and Jarek asked if this was indeed the residence of Viscount Haxon. One of the knights confirmed to Jarek that this was the intended place, and Jarek showed keen interest as he asked about the mission assigned to them by the Marquise. The knight clearly responded that their mission was to capture Damien Haxon specifically. Jarek, with a firm and cold expression, added that capturing someone like Damien would be easy, but that alone wouldn't be enough to cover the insult suffered by young Erwin and the family. At that moment, an old man appeared, walking with difficulty and leaning on his cane, slowly approaching the group of knights. Jarek stared sharply at the old man as he watched him approach, but remained still in his place. One of the knights rudely shouted at the old man, saying, "Hey, old man," which made the elder turn toward them in visible fear. The menacing shadows of the knights loomed over the elderly man, who anxiously asked who they were. A knight asked the old man if he was a resident of the Haxon estate. The old man, trembling, answered yes and asked why they were asking. Suddenly, the elderly man was struck violently, his head slammed to the ground with great force. Jarek then spoke with intense anger, questioning how a mere citizen of a viscount's land dared not bow before the emblem of House Leonblum. He continued, stating that failing to show proper respect to the Leonblum family was a serious offense deserving of harsh punishment. Jarek then called to his two accompanying knights, Lavender and Ulvis, and they responded promptly and with great respect. Jarek gave a sly smile and told them he had a good idea for what they were going to do. His eyes turned toward the house, and he told them that once they reached the Viscount's mansion, they would drag Damien Haxon out. Victor's face appeared, clearly filled with fear and utter shock at what he was hearing. Jarek continued coldly, declaring that they would kill anyone who stood in their way without hesitation. Elsewhere, 3 individuals in cloaks were seen walking away from the cave they had previously investigated. One of them expressed some frustration, noting that the site had collapsed, and they hadn't obtained the information they were hoping for. Despite that, she praised everyone's efforts, and said their work had been good enough. One of the knights suddenly stopped, having noticed something unusual. All the knights turned to see Damien, who was sitting in deep focus, surrounded by a clearly visible blue aura of energy. It appeared he was training in his newly acquired mana cultivation technique. Agnes gazed at the scene in astonishment, internally questioning what exactly she was witnessing. In her thoughts, Agnes explained that the technique she had given Damien was designed to push him to his absolute limits. A look of amazement appeared on her face as she observed Damien himself, deeply surprised by how much progress he had made in such a short time. After a few moments, Damien noticed that Agnes and the other knights were watching him with clear admiration and awe on their faces. Damien asked Agnes whether the investigation had concluded, and she replied, somewhat hesitantly, that it had indeed been completed. Agnes then added with a light smile that it seemed he had managed to achieve some promising results in his mana training. Damien examined the book he had received earlier, thinking to himself that they weren't exaggerating when they said obtaining it was difficult. It truly was incredibly valuable. A page of the book appeared before him, containing an explanation of the technique Tyrant's Energy Cultivation, which allows the user to rapidly gather energy and temporarily absorb external energy for use. Damien stood before the Holy Knight Agnes in a moment of silence, the two of them looking at each other without speaking. Suddenly, Damien realized that it had gotten late, and he told himself that evening had already fallen. He invited Agnes to return, mentioning that dinner had been prepared. But suddenly, Damien sensed a strong hostile aura and felt that some kind of danger was present. He told Agnes seriously that some troublesome individuals had arrived, while Agnes looked surprised and questioned what he meant. Damien quickly apologized to Agnes and told her he had something urgent to attend to, asking her to follow him at her own pace. He then took off at incredible speed, leaving Agnes stunned by how fast he moved. Agnes stood in complete astonishment, and the knight beside her also commented in disbelief on Damien's immense speed. Agnes wondered to herself how Damien could move so quickly despite using only a small amount of mana. Could he truly control it with such precision? While Damien was dashing ahead, Agnes internally questioned the upper limit of his current capabilities. At the Haxon residence, one of the invading knights from House Leonblum struck Victor with tremendous force. Victor fell to the ground from the impact of the blow, while the knight who hit him stood proudly, with clear arrogance. The knight shouted loudly, demanding that Damien Haxon be brought out of the house immediately. But Victor vehemently refused, shouting in anger that the knights were trying to harm his young master, Damien. One of the servants cried out for help, urgently calling for Viscount Haxon. Jarek shouted for everyone to stop what they were doing immediately. Viscount Haxon appeared clearly before the knights, with worry and anger showing on his face as he looked at the scene before him. He rushed toward Victor and asked him with great concern if he was all right. The Viscount embraced Victor, who was lying on the ground, and shouted angrily at the knights, questioning how they dared to assault a civilian in such a manner. But Jarek responded with chilling coldness, saying that what they had done was nothing compared to the insult inflicted upon House Leonblum. Jarek then addressed Viscount Paul Haxon directly, demanding that he hand over Damien Haxon in accordance with the orders of Marquis Leonblum. Internally, the Viscount reacted with anger, expressing deep frustration at the barbaric methods employed by House Leonblum. Jarek, however, smiled maliciously, thinking to himself that his words about ensuring safety were just a lie, and that if Damien were handed over, he would burn the place down entirely. Viscount Paul Haxon replied with clear firmness, stating that under no circumstances would he hand over his son, Damien. Jarek then asked menacingly if the Viscount was sure of his decision. The Viscount replied with full confidence that he was. At that moment, Jarek angrily ordered his knights to destroy everything in the place until Damien appeared before them. Viscount Haxon screamed in rage at the knights, demanding that they stop, with panic and shock visibly spreading across his face. But suddenly, the shadow of someone approaching at an incredible speed appeared, clearly startling everyone present. Jarek quickly turned around when he sensed the presence of someone approaching from afar and asked himself what was happening. Damien calmly approached Jarek, who turned to face him and asked furiously and angrily who he was. Jarek froze in place for a moment, completely stunned by the identity of the person now standing before him. Jarek felt his body completely frozen, unable to move, as he stared at Damien, who stood firmly before him with clear strength and composure. Elsewhere, Damien was kneeling beside his father on the ground, asking him with concern if he was all right. His father replied that he was fine, but expressed his worry about Victor. Damien looked toward Victor, his face showing sadness and seriousness as he observed his injured servant. Damien then addressed the attacking knights in a cold and provocative tone, asking them if they realized how lucky they had been. He continued, saying that if it weren't for Victor's strong body, he wouldn't have survived that beating. He might have been killed, and if that had happened, Damien wouldn't have hesitated to beat them to death. Jarek responded mockingly to Damien, saying he was clearly the failure son of Viscount Haxon and accusing him of arrogance for defeating Erwin with a cheap trick. Damien smirked sarcastically, calmly repeating the phrase, "a cheap trick," a clear sign of his disdain for Jarek's words. Jarek ordered the knights to break Damien's leg bones immediately and force him to kneel before him. The knights charged toward Damien quickly to carry out Jarek's command. But Damien moved calmly and steadily, easily dodging one of the knights' attacks. He remarked to himself that the timing was perfect to use the mana technique he had recently mastered. In the next moment, he grabbed the knight's arm with great force. Then, Damien delivered a powerful, energy-charged punch to the knight, who screamed in pain. Immediately after, another knight attempted to attack Damien. But Damien struck back at an astonishing speed, and the knight couldn't react at all. That knight received a tremendously strong kick from Damien, sending him flying and knocking him to the ground instantly. Jarek appeared slightly surprised, but nonetheless moved forward, preparing to use his full power. Victor opened his eyes weakly, looking toward Damien and softly asking in a strained voice about his young master's condition. Damien turned toward Victor and asked with clear concern if he was okay. Victor, still lying on the ground, smiled and raised his thumb toward Damien to reassure him he was all right despite his state. Damien smiled quietly while staring ahead, thinking to himself that Victor, just as he had expected, was a fascinating person. Jarek stepped forward and stood face to face with Damien, beginning to doubt himself as he wondered whether Erwin had really been defeated by a cheap trick. Jarek looked at the fallen knight and said that, despite everything, he couldn't comprehend how a failure like Damien could possess such combat skill. Damien replied coldly to Jarek, saying that he didn't need to know the answer to that question. Jarek gave a sly smile and said that only now had he come to fully understand the truth. He pointed at Damien with full confidence and told him that he was not the real Damien. Confusion clearly appeared on the faces of Victor and Damien's father, while Damien himself was baffled by Jarek's irrational claim. Jarek then shouted angrily at Damien, accusing him of being a mere imposter brought in to defeat Erwin and dishonor the Leonblum family. He continued yelling that this was a clear conspiracy, orchestrated by people who harbored hatred toward the Marquise. Jarek went on with his accusations, declaring that Damien was just a substitute, placed here for the sole purpose of humiliating the family. He raised his voice loudly, threatening Damien that he would pay for the insult he had directed at House Leonblum. Internally, Damien thought to himself that this man was far more foolish than he had initially appeared, truly a complete idiot. One of the knights lay on the ground and decided inwardly to pretend to be unconscious to avoid further confrontation. Meanwhile, Damien's father, still seated on the ground, called out to his son, encouraging him to win. Jarek clenched his fist tightly, preparing to face Damien, while the latter stood confidently in place, staring back at him. Jarek glared intensely and told himself that Damien seemed lucky, but he decided this would be his end. Jarek took a single step toward Damien, determined to defeat him the moment he entered his attack range. Like a flash of lightning, Jarek readied himself for a decisive strike, assuring himself that he would end the fight in the blink of an eye. Jarek furiously declared to himself that he would slice Damien in half with a single final blow. He then launched forward at full speed toward Damien, assuming a powerful offensive stance. During the attack, Jarek's sword clashed with Damien's, but Damien blocked it effortlessly. Damien smiled confidently, thinking to himself that his assumptions had been correct. House Leonblum had finally sent an official knight to confront him. Jarek launched another attack, this time with full force, charging straight at Damien, who remained standing calmly without flinching. Jarek was shocked to see Damien effortlessly parry his swift and powerful strike. Furious, Jarek yelled and delivered an even stronger blow, daring Damien to block it this time. But Damien blocked the strike with absolute ease and quietly remarked that Jarek was far too slow. Shock and disbelief were written all over Jarek's face at Damien's sudden speed and power. At that moment, Damien calmly declared that it was now his turn to attack. With extraordinary speed, Damien dashed toward Jarek and landed a lightning-fast blow that made Jarek cry out in pain. Jarek was in utter shock from the sheer power and speed of Damien's strike, inwardly admitting that he hadn't even seen the blow clearly. Damien then quickly delivered a very powerful kick to Jarek, striking him directly and knocking him forcefully to the ground. Jarek hit the ground hard after taking the blow, completely unable to mount any defensive response. Damien stood before the fallen Jarek. He then told him clearly that the blow was payback for what he did to his servant, Victor. Jarek stood up with great difficulty, visibly angry and shaken by the swift defeat he had just suffered. He screamed furiously at Damien, preparing to launch another attack. Jarek charged forward with all the strength he had left, shouting threats at Damien. Damien focused calmly and announced that he would now use his secret technique, Jarek unleashed a secret sword technique, Great Lion's Rapid Blade, in an attempt to overwhelm Damien with sheer power. Damien countered the rushing attack and coldly remarked that all of this was just meaningless noise. Damien easily blocked Jarek's powerful strike and deflected his sword without any noticeable effort. Jarek was deeply shocked by Damien's overwhelming power, which shattered his weapon into scattered fragments. In the next moment, Damien struck with a lightning-fast blow toward Jarek, who appeared utterly unable to block or evade. Jarek received a powerful blow that made him scream in agony, then fell to the ground violently and forcefully. Damien's father was utterly shocked by the scene before him, watching in clear astonishment. Victor shouted with great excitement and joy, raising his fist high in the air, declaring that Damien had won the fight. Jarek groaned in pain, clutching his injured shoulder, and shouted urgently and angrily for someone to stop the bleeding immediately. The tip of a sword appeared near Jarek's face, causing him to feel intense fear and panic. Jarek began pleading with Damien, begging for mercy, insisting that he didn't know who Damien was, but pleading desperately for forgiveness. Damien responded coldly and clearly, telling him he had already said he was Damien Haxon, and called Jarek an idiot. Damien looked at Jarek and told him that if he truly wanted to beg, he should have done it much earlier, and that it was far too late now. He continued, bluntly accusing Jarek of daring to harm his family, and of disfiguring his servant's already ugly face. Jarek was shocked by Damien's harsh words and started begging again, even more pitifully, pleading for mercy and forgiveness for what he had done. Damien looked at him coldly and said his apology seemed directed at the wrong person. Footsteps approached quietly, making Jarek feel tense and confused, wondering who was coming. The servants from Viscount Haxon's household appeared, surrounding Jarek with intimidating expressions, causing him to panic. Jarek sat on the ground alongside the other knights who had accompanied him, each of them showing clear signs of defeat and fear. Victor asked Damien if he wanted to hit Jarek a bit more, but Damien ordered him to stop, saying that continuing might actually kill him. He then jokingly suggested they could just cut off one of Jarek's limbs instead, which caused Jarek to tremble in horror. The Viscount gently placed a hand on Damien's shoulder to stop him and said that what he had done so far was more than enough. Jarek collapsed, repeatedly apologizing and desperately begging for forgiveness from both Damien and Viscount Haxon for the insult he had caused. But Viscount Haxon rejected his apology with anger, shouting that an apology alone would never be enough. He continued, speaking with sharp clarity, explaining that if his son Damien didn't possess such great strength, their estate would have been destroyed and his son dragged away by force to House Leonblum's estate. Jarek, now terrified, lowered his head until it touched the ground, begging for mercy and pardon. Viscount Haxon quietly stared down at Jarek, who was prostrated before him, saying nothing, lost in thought. Then he looked at Damien with an expression that asked what should be done with them. Damien stood behind his father, calmly thinking to himself, admitting that he never intended to kill Jarek in the first place. He continued his internal monologue, explaining that if he killed the knights of House Leonblum here, the relationship with the Marquis would deteriorate to its worst possible state. Damien then said he could fight them alone if necessary, but he couldn't do that without considering the consequences for his family. After deep thought, Damien realized that if he let them go easily now, they would definitely return for revenge soon, leaving him conflicted. Suddenly Agnes called out his name clearly, making him quickly turn toward the source of the voice. Agnes appeared, hurrying toward him, asking what was going on in this place. Damien felt a sense of relief upon seeing Agnes approaching, thinking to himself that her presence might be extremely helpful in this situation. He then began explaining to her what had happened. Agnes smiled and said calmly that she now understood the situation clearly, and told Damien that she could help him resolve this dilemma. Agnes walked toward Damien with a grateful smile and told him that thanks to Viscount Haxon and his family, they had managed, for the first time, to defeat one of the leaders of the Yulin organization. Damien's face showed clear signs of surprise when Agnes told him that, with this level of cooperation, the Haxon family could now be considered an official partner. In the background, Victor asked the Viscount whether this meant their family could finally escape the current crisis. Hope was evident on both their faces. Damien eagerly approached Agnes and politely asked if he could request her help with something. Damien smiled to himself, thinking that this was exactly what he had aimed for from the beginning, securing the church's protection. Agnes felt a little flustered by Damien's sudden closeness and stepped back apologetically. Damien then turned toward the fallen knights and clearly asked them if they had heard what was said regarding the church's protection of House Haxon. Jarek, trembling, told him to go himself and inform Marquis Leonblum that House Haxon was now under the church's protection. Damien continued his warning, saying that if House Leonblum tried to use force again, they would have to deal with the wrath of the church. With a cold and firm expression, Damien ordered them to leave the area immediately. The knights fled the place in a panic, thanking Damien nervously for sparing them. Victor looked at them with disdain and commented that they fled like dogs in fear. But Damien's father interrupted Victor, pointing out that despite their retreat, the crisis was far from over. The Viscount immediately proposed that the family hold a meeting to discuss what actions to take next. The family gathered in the meeting room within the manor, and Viscount Haxon officially announced the beginning of the session. Louise began speaking, stating that the topic of the meeting was how to deal with the conflict that had arisen with House Leonblum. Abel asked in confusion why they should bother resolving the issue now that they were under the church's protection. Louise explained to Abel that they couldn't rely on the church to mediate such a conflict directly. Viscount Paul Haxon affirmed his daughter Louise's point and explained that the church does not interfere in disputes between noble houses, especially considering that Marquis Leonblum's strength isn't limited to military power. The Viscount continued, explaining that House Leonblum had the capability to crush lesser noble houses like theirs easily if they so wished. Agnes then spoke, explaining that their current options were either to pay financial reparations or to align themselves with a stronger noble house for protection. But at that moment, Agnes interrupted everyone as she stepped forward and told them that there was one more option available. Agnes excitedly announced that the option was for Damien to become a holy knight of the church. A stunned silence fell over the family at Agnes's unexpected proposal and Damien's refusal. Then Viscount Paul Haxon said that the option was off the table as long as Damien had refused it. But Abel stood up and called out to his father loudly. His father asked what he wanted, and Abel suddenly shouted at him in anger, protesting his quick surrender and rejection of the option. Abel angrily asked why they weren't taking this option seriously, especially since it could solve all of their current problems. Abel mocked Damien, saying all he had to do was accept becoming a holy knight, and laughed derisively. But at that moment, Abel suddenly felt an extremely terrifying energy behind him, causing him to turn around in shock and fear. The Viscount told him that they had guests, and that he should behave with proper manners. Abel let out a sound of dissatisfaction as he sat with the rest of the family around the conference table. Damien's father explained that Abel was right, that Damien had indeed caused this conflict with the Marquise's family, but emphasized that the blame did not lie solely with Damien. His mother continued the discussion, explaining that the Marquise's second son had intended to pursue Louise from the beginning, and even if Damien hadn't provoked him, he wouldn't have given up easily. Viscount Haxon added that Damien had, in fact, protected his sister Louise from that man's schemes and had done what her powerless father could not. Damien's father addressed him directly, calling his name Damien, in a calm and composed tone. Damien responded respectfully, saying, "Yes, father," and waited for what he had to say next. His father told him he had done well today, clearly commending his actions. He went on to say that Damien had not tolerated the insult directed at their family and had stood up for them as he should have. Damien was surprised inwardly by his father's words. He hadn't known that his father felt that way about what he'd done. Damien replied to his father, saying he had only done what he believed he needed to do. His father reassured him and said that he would personally handle this issue from now on. But his mother interrupted and told him that she would handle the matter, asking everyone to allow her to act as the lady of the house this time. Suddenly, one of the servants entered the room, apologizing and addressing the Viscount respectfully. The servant explained that someone from the ducal house of Gold Pixie had arrived and wished to see him. Viscount Haxon asked in surprise why someone from House Gold Pixie would come to them. The envoy began to speak hesitantly, saying that it concerned Damien, who had borrowed a sum of money and used the Viscount's wheat field as collateral, and that the payment deadline had already passed. Damien grew deeply anxious and began to scold himself internally, wondering whether the field had already been sold. He froze in place, confused, as his father called his name loudly and angrily. Viscount Haxon continued to berate Damien for the continuous trouble he caused. The envoy entered with a calm smile and greeted Damien, saying it had been a long time since their last meeting and that he was here today because the repayment deadline had arrived. The envoy continued speaking, sarcastically suggesting that Damien use his family's land as collateral again to borrow more money, smirking as he made the offer. Damien felt both anger and frustration, internally berating himself for even considering such collateral in the past. He then asked the envoy how much money he currently owed. The envoy answered with a mocking smile, saying that the amount Damien had borrowed was 200 gold coins, but with interest, the total had now reached 300 gold coins. Damien was completely stunned by the number he had just heard, wondering to himself why he had borrowed that much in the first place. He admitted he couldn't clearly recall the reason, but he was sure his family didn't have that amount now. Damien thought to himself with deep concern, imagining his entire family ending up on the streets because of this massive debt. The envoy clearly explained that if the amount was not repaid today, the land used as collateral would officially become the property of House Gold Pixie. Damien, shocked, asked the envoy angrily whether he hadn't said before that using the land as collateral was merely a formality. The envoy smiled slyly and told Damien he didn't actually have a choice. House Gold Pixie had instructed him to collect all debts, regardless of whether the debtors were nobles or commoners. The envoy continued his threat, telling Damien to quickly bring the money if he understood the situation, or else, implying that Damien probably didn't have it. He then asked Damien directly if he couldn't pay the amount. Damien answered very calmly that he had indeed not been able to gather the required payment. The envoy smiled cunningly and said that he understood the situation very well. The envoy sat arrogantly on the sofa in a disrespectful manner, looking at Damien with clear disdain as he stood before him in the room. He began speaking sarcastically, commenting that Damien should never have borrowed money in the first place if he couldn't repay it. The envoy stated that he had no choice now but to use the method he knew best to collect the money from Damien. Two intimidating guards appeared behind Damien, clearly threatening him, causing Damien to feel intense pressure. The envoy admitted to himself that he had known from the beginning Damien wouldn't be able to pay, and confessed inwardly that money wasn't truly what mattered most to him. He added in his thoughts that what he really enjoyed was seeing arrogant nobles begging before him. He then wondered inwardly what kind of expression would appear on Damien's face now as he stood surrounded by guards and faced danger. The envoy felt an odd thrill just imagining Damien's reaction and admitted that the thought alone gave him chills. Viscount Haxon looked ahead in shock, his mouth slightly open, unable to say a word. In another part of the estate, the Haxon family sat together while the mother urged the Viscount to sit down and rest, warning that he might collapse from the stress. The Viscount refused to sit, rejecting the idea that he could rest while his family was on the verge of ruin and complete collapse. Abel also shouted angrily, agreeing with his father and demanding to know how they could remain calm when their family faced such a fate. Damien's mother asked both of them to calm down and trust in Damien, pointing out that he had always been able to overcome crises. The Viscount responded anxiously, saying that the only reason Damien had been able to overcome problems until now was due to his exceptional combat skills. Viscount Haxon clearly emphasized that combat skills and negotiation skills were two entirely separate things and should not be confused. Suddenly, a loud crashing sound caught everyone's attention. It turned out that Damien had taken down one of the guards inside the room, leaving the envoy shocked and fearful. Damien said sarcastically that he would definitely get a severe scolding from his father for such violent behavior. But suddenly, the remaining guard charged at him in anger, raising his weapon high in an attempt to strike. With incredible speed, Damien blocked the guard's attack and grabbed his face with immense force, causing the guard to scream in pain. Damien lifted the guard by his face, calmly commenting that drawing a weapon against a noble could be considered self-defense. A terrifying smile appeared on Damien's face. As the envoy sat frozen in fear, watching in utter shock, the envoy screamed in panic as he shrank back on the sofa, trying to get away from Damien, who was slowly approaching him. Damien approached the envoy silently, while the envoy stared at him in clear terror. Damien calmly said, "You, get off your knees," and the envoy, terrified, quickly agreed. Damien explained to the envoy that he currently couldn't repay the debt in cash. The envoy looked slightly nervous, but Damien continued, saying he wanted to repay the debt in a different way. Damien approached the envoy with a bright and friendly smile, asking if he could settle the debt using a method other than money. The envoy, deeply unsettled, agreed quickly, frightened and confused by Damien's unpredictable demeanor. The next day, the sky appeared clear above the manor, signaling the beginning of a new day full of events. Abel expressed deep sorrow as he spoke to his father, prompting his father to ask what was troubling him. Abel explained that he was upset because justice had been defeated by violence, while Damien's mother and sister were advising him to be careful on his journey. Damien assured them that he would return safely and told them not to worry. Abel shouted in protest and frustration, which led his father to scold him and tell him to stop saying strange things, and simply encourage his brother Damien on his long journey. Internally, the father admitted to himself that he had no choice but to agree to the plan, though he remained unsure whether it would actually succeed. Agnes stood before Damien and calmly told him she was sorry that they would be parting ways so soon. Damien thanked her for all the help she had provided, and she replied that she had only done what was right. Agnes then explained that her investigation was nearly complete and that she would be returning to her post the next day. She wished Damien a safe journey, and Damien thanked her in return with a gentle smile. Before leaving, Agnes told Damien that if he ever changed his mind about joining them, he should let her know, but he firmly responded that he would not change his mind. Damien prepared to leave and asked Victor if his luggage was ready. Victor confirmed it was. Damien sat in the travel carriage and commented on how spacious it felt, only to be surprised to see the envoy from House Goldpixie sitting inside. The envoy explained that he wanted to ensure Damien's comfort during the long trip. Damien smiled calmly and said that was thoughtful of him, then requested a luxurious crab meal for lunch, leaving the envoy puzzled by the unusual request. Damien turned to Victor, who was sitting beside him, and called his name. Victor immediately responded with enthusiasm, "Yes, young master." Then Victor shouted excitedly, announcing the start of their long journey. The horses surged forward at high speed, beginning their journey, and Damien prepared to depart with clear determination. He looked forward with firm resolve, and declared that they were heading to the ducal estate of House Goldpixie. Their carriage arrived at the grand mansion of House Goldpixie, where Damien stood with Victor and the envoy before the large building. Damien gazed at the large mansion, and admitted to himself that House Goldpixie's estate truly deserved its grand reputation. Damien smiled and told the envoy that he wouldn't forget that things had gone smoothly thanks to his help. The envoy replied that he had informed the Duke of Damien's arrival and that he could enter immediately. Back in the carriage, the envoy was quietly sulking, internally complaining about his bad luck and his frustration with Damien's treatment of him. He continued blaming Damien in his mind, resenting him for making him suffer like this when he could have stayed comfortably in his usual position. The envoy told himself that he hoped things would go smoothly and that he wouldn't end up dead, though deep down he was hoping for quite the opposite. Damien then smiled at Victor and told him that he would be back soon. Victor replied enthusiastically, "Yes, young master." Damien entered the mansion, where someone inside asked if he truly was Damien Haxon. Duke Adam Goldpixie appeared, clearly asking if Damien was really the Haxon family's son he had heard so much about. Damien thanked him for acknowledging him and admitted to himself that he had come for a very specific purpose. He told the Duke bluntly that someone named Dimitri had told him the Duke was looking for him, and asked him directly why. Damien calmly admitted to the Duke that he had borrowed money from the Duke's loan office, and that the repayment deadline was approaching. He explained that, unfortunately, he didn't currently have the funds to pay it back, but wished to repay the debt in a different way. Damien clearly declared before Duke Adam Goldpixie that he would defeat House Leonblum, and that his victory over them would serve as repayment for the debt he owed. The Duke and those around him were stunned by Damien's sudden statement. The night ghoul Limerich laughed, saying that Damien had probably heard the rumors, and that's why he had come to them at this particular time. Damien began to think seriously about the current situation, noting to himself that he had indeed heard the rumors recently about the discovery of a large gold mine on the border. A conflict had erupted between House Leonblum and House Goldpixie over control of the mine, and duels between low-ranking knights had already begun to determine ownership. Damien realized that he already knew how these duels would likely end, and he predicted that House Leonblum would win decisively. He visualized a clear image of House Leonblum's victory and anticipated that such a win would rapidly expand their influence. At the same time, House Goldpixie would begin to lose its power little by little. Damien concluded internally that if he could help Duke Adam Goldpixie secure victory, he would be able to repay his debt entirely. He added to himself that doing so would also allow him to rein in House Leonblum, achieving two goals at once. Duke Goldpixie smiled with deep interest, asking Damien if he truly had the courage to challenge the noble House Leonblum and destroy one of its key organizations. Damien replied with a calm smile, saying that such a notion wasn't far from reality at all. The Duke smiled and told Damien that he was currently having a hard time finding a suitable knight for the upcoming duel. Damien confidently assured the Duke that he was the ideal candidate for the task, explaining that no low-ranking knight other than himself could stand up to Leonblum's eldest son. The Duke asked Damien if he truly believed he could defeat Michael Leonblum, who was renowned for his exceptional dueling skills. Damien smiled with unwavering confidence and answered that he was fully aware of Michael Leonblum's abilities, but he would never lose to him. Knight Ernst Hovitz immediately interjected, warning the Duke not to believe everything Damien said, and pointing out that rumors were often exaggerated. Hovitz then continued, saying that Lady Chelsea would surely return soon with a knight suited for the duel. He added that Lady Chelsea had left some time ago in search of a worthy knight to face Michael Leonblum. Hovitz affirmed that her return was expected shortly and that he was confident in her ability to find an outstanding duelist. Hovitz and the other knights smiled with great confidence when the Duke confirmed their remarks. Damien noticed that Hovitz was starting to sabotage things for him, and mentally described him as being like a bone chewed by a ghoul. nothing but an obstacle to his plan. The Duke sat at his desk and remarked thoughtfully that he was now wondering what to do in this kind of situation. Damien sensed that the Duke was testing him, wanting to see how he would respond in such a scenario. Damien resolved that he had to prove himself through action, not just words, and he clearly announced to the Duke that everyone was making a huge mistake. He spoke with complete confidence, telling Hovitz that if the Duke truly wanted to win the duel, he needed to choose Damien as his representative. There was no other knight capable of facing him. Hovitz was stunned by Damien's boldness and asked angrily if he even knew who Lady Chelsea was bringing as a challenger. Damien smiled again and calmly offered to let Hovitz try landing a single strike on him, if that would ease his concerns. Hovitz's face twisted in anger and disbelief at Damien's bold and unexpected suggestion, while Damien continued to smile calmly. Hovitz asked the Duke for permission to demonstrate his skills to Damien. The Duke agreed, feeling the atmosphere grow increasingly intense and exciting. Damien and Hovitz then proceeded to the dueling grounds to begin their match. Victor was struck with intense shock and worry, wondering in disbelief what Damien was doing now, while Damien simply replied that things had turned out this way, without any planning on his part. Victor grew increasingly anxious and tense as he watched the knight standing before Damien, while the knight's aura flared around him with a terrifying and menacing energy. Duke Goldpixie gave a clear order to Hovitz to begin the attack immediately, and Hovitz agreed with calm confidence. Hovitz stepped forward powerfully and firmly, addressing Damien with a mocking tone, telling him that if he begged now, perhaps he might spare him. But Damien responded coldly, yawning and telling Hovitz to hurry up with his attack, because he was starting to feel sleepy. This greatly provoked Hovitz. Hovitz launched forward with immense power, his energy-coated sword rushing toward Damien at great speed, shouting that he would end this with a single blow. But Damien appeared perfectly calm and confident, though he began to wonder inwardly if he might have provoked Hovitz a bit too much. Hovitz screamed in fury as he charged at Damien, declaring that he would smash his arrogant face with one strike. Damien effortlessly dodged the first attack, inwardly acknowledging that Hovitz's combat skills were indeed fitting for a mid-ranked knight. However, Damien affirmed to himself that if he could pinpoint the attack's direction precisely, deflecting it wouldn't be difficult at all. Hovitz delivered a powerful and sudden blow, but Damien easily blocked the dangerous attack. Damien's sword began to crack visibly from the force of the block. Hovitz suddenly gave a very sly smile, wondering to himself whether Damien had truly fallen into his trap that easily. In a surprise move, Hovitz launched a lightning-fast strike that landed directly on Damien, causing him to scream in pain as blood splattered from his body. Victor and Duke Goldpixie screamed in horror together as they witnessed Damien suffer a sudden and serious injury. Damien dashed forward with incredible speed after taking the hit, stunning everyone who witnessed his sudden and unexpected movement. Shock and disbelief appeared on Hovitz's face as he wondered anxiously to himself whether Damien had truly endured the sudden attack he delivered. Duke Goldpixie turned toward the knight beside him and called him Protector, while the knight listened attentively, ready to hear what the Duke had to say. Damien pointed toward the Duke and confidently declared that the position of the Duke's representative now belonged to him. Victor rushed toward Damien, calling out loudly, "Young master!" and then hugged him tightly, leaving Damien visibly surprised. Damien asked Victor with concern if he was okay, while Victor held on to him, asking how he had managed to dodge the attack without being harmed. Damien smiled calmly and told Victor with full confidence that he had already said he wouldn't be hurt. Duke Goldpixie joined the conversation, expressing his amazement and great admiration at Damien's success in defending against Hovitz's attack. The Duke admitted he had been somewhat skeptical at first, but now he was convinced that Damien's combat skills were real and exceptional. The Duke smiled and said that Damien was truly a great asset to them after the abilities he had just demonstrated. Then he stood up and officially announced before all his guards that Damien Haxon had proven himself excellently, and therefore, as previously promised, he would appoint him as his official representative. Hovitz, greatly concerned, tried to object, saying, "But your grace..." The Duke cut him off firmly and with visible anger, telling Hovitz to stop immediately because he was in a good mood and didn't want it ruined. Hovitz responded hesitantly and with obvious fear, saying he understood and would no longer object. Damien stood calmly before everyone, while Hovitz felt deeply frustrated, admitting internally that he had been absolutely certain his strike had landed. Damien turned toward Hovitz and told him he was now being scolded by the Duke, and that while his skills weren't bad, he had chosen the wrong person to challenge. Damien continued speaking with calm confidence, explaining that he had already surpassed the level of a mid-tier knight and had become even stronger. He noted to himself that it was necessary to display that strength now, especially since only mid-tier nobles were allowed to participate in the duel. Damien admitted that if he hadn't used mana at that critical moment, things could have become extremely dangerous. Duke Gold Pixie stood silently in front of Damien, staring at him thoughtfully and with deep consideration. The Duke noticed internal injuries in Damien and told him he couldn't ignore his current condition. Then the Duke suddenly pulled out a strange ring, surprising Damien and prompting him to wonder whether it was a magical item that allowed storage. From the magical device, the Duke withdrew a small box and handed it to Damien, telling him it was a personal gift. Damien opened the box, which radiated magical energy. Inside were small spheres known as balance orbs. The Duke explained to Damien that these orbs were typically used by knights during training, and they were also very effective for healing internal injuries. Damien thanked him quietly for the valuable gift. The Duke smiled and told Damien he would be counting on him from now on. Damien responded with a confident smile and told him he would do everything he could. The next day, the Gold Pixie estate appeared bright under the sunlight as Damien walked quietly through its courtyard. Placing a hand on his chest, Damien noticed that his internal wounds had nearly healed completely in just one night, admitting the effectiveness of the orbs given to him by the Duke. He also found that the Duke had excellent training equipment, and Damien decided that he would begin training with it from now on. Then someone approached and asked if he was Damien Haxon. Damien replied that the man was correct, then asked for his identity. The man introduced himself as Pavel Bermond and said that these individuals with him were his comrades in arms. Knight Pavel Bermond stepped forward enthusiastically with two of his fellow knights, declaring that they too would be participants in the upcoming duel. Damien was slightly surprised by the sudden appearance of these knights and asked in confusion if they were also participating. Pavel answered him in a provocative tone that yes, they were. He explained that Damien was very lucky they had been absent yesterday due to external training. Pavel added confidently that if they had been present, they would have handled him instead of Knight Hovitz. Pavel continued, telling Damien that the duel with House Leonblum was a critical matter for the Duke's family, and warned him not to hinder the knights with his poor skills. He firmly added that if Damien understood the situation clearly, then he should step aside so they could begin their training. Damien moved slightly to the side, deciding internally that he was very eager to watch the Duke's knights demonstrate their combat skills. One of the knights launched a special technique called the High Rise of the Bird, loudly announcing his attack with great energy and enthusiasm. At the same moment, another knight launched a similar attack alongside his comrade, escalating the duel between them even further. The knight shouted while charging at his opponent, expressing his determination to win this 98th duel. But his opponent replied loudly and mockingly, questioning who had decided he would be the victor this time. The knight appeared pained as he took a hit from his opponent and staggered slightly backward. Then, unexpectedly, Knight Pavel Bermond dashed forward with immense strength and landed a fast, decisive strike on his opponent. His opponent was utterly shocked by the sudden blow, his face filled with disbelief. As he was about to take the hit, he said that this was just what one would expect from Pavel. He then added that Pavel had read his attack and blocked it effortlessly, using only his forehead. The duel ended, and his opponent admitted that he had learned something new today thanks to sparring with Pavel. Pavel then proposed that they end the match in a draw, given his opponent's clear improvement. A large knight approached Pavel with great enthusiasm and told him that his body was burning with excitement for a duel, asking him to fight him next. In the background, two other knights discussed the upcoming duel with House Leonblum, affirming that if they continued to train seriously, the results would be very promising. The other knight agreed and declared confidently that they would eventually defeat House Leonblum and elevate the honor and standing of the Duke's family. The three knights raised their swords high and shouted together with enthusiasm, "All for one!" Then followed in unison, "And one for all," demonstrating their unity, determination, and excitement for the upcoming battle. Damien and Victor stood silently at a distance, watching the passionate display without uttering a word. Victor, deeply puzzled, asked Damien why he was standing there silently, wondering who these suddenly appearing highly spirited people were. Damien, feeling disappointed, told Victor that it looked like they had already lost the duel. Victor was completely shocked by Damien's unexpected words and nervously asked what he meant by that. Damien calmly and plainly explained that he simply didn't have enough confidence in their ability to beat those highly motivated knights. Duke Goldpixie appeared, laughing loudly, expressing how impressed he was by the knights' incredible enthusiasm, though he couldn't help but poke a little fun at how far their energy had gone. He told the large knight beside him that there was no need to hide his opinion and that he could speak honestly about how he felt. The large knight replied bluntly that he didn't really care about it at all. In a flashback to the previous night, Damien had apologized to Duke Goldpixie and thanked him for his offer, but explained that he preferred to train alone. The Duke laughed and said Damien was truly an interesting person, especially after rejecting the guidance of the senior knight Heinrich. He then asked Heinrich for his opinion of Damien. Knight Heinrich responded, saying that Damien was an impressive individual, and that there weren't many people capable of deploying a magical barrier in a split second to avoid a fatal blow. Duke Goldpixie sat at his large desk and asked the knight beside him for his expectations regarding the outcome of the upcoming duel, wondering if they truly had a chance of defeating House Leonblum. The knight responded cautiously, clearly hesitant, saying that he couldn't give a definitive or certain answer at this time. He then explained to the Duke that the duel would consist of 3 participants from each side, and victory would go to the team that won 2 out of 3 matches. He emphasized that even if Damien performed well, that alone would not guarantee total victory. Duke Goldpixie agreed, saying that was true, and added that the rest of the duchy's knights would also need to perform well in the duel. He then asked about the progress of the training being overseen by mid-tier knight Vincenzo. Another knight responded with clear confidence, telling the Duke that he probably need not worry about that matter. Outside, Damien stood quietly, watching the rest of his team as they trained. He observed the 3 knights from a distance and noticed that their energy was dropping rapidly, and that their skills weren't what he had expected. He thought to himself that they would surely fail if they continued at this pace. Damien sighed and told himself that he had no choice but to step in and help them a little with their training. He called out to the 3 knights standing there in a clear voice, "You 3, over there." The knights turned to him quickly, slightly surprised by how suddenly he addressed them. Damien smiled and asked them to dare to engage in a training duel with him, just once. Pavel Bermond smiled confidently and told Damien he was very bold to even think of challenging them, especially after having seen their skills earlier. Damien replied with strong confidence, saying that he accepted their challenge, but that he wanted to face all of them at once. The 3 knights froze in place, stunned by the sheer audacity of Damien's bold statement. Pavel shouted furiously, demanding how an arrogant fool like Damien could dare challenge all of them at the same time. Damien stepped forward calmly and confidently, clearly stating that, although challenging 3 knights at once violated chivalric rules, such rules didn't apply to those he considered mere rabid dogs. The 3 knights charged at Damien in fury, launching a fierce, simultaneous attack, calling him a bastard. Despite the rapid and coordinated attack, Damien remained perfectly calm, standing in place without moving. Suddenly, one of the knights saw the world upside down. Pavel found himself lying on the ground without even realizing what had happened to him. Pavel looked around in confusion, deeply shaken as he tried to understand what was going on. Moments later, both Pavel and his other comrade found themselves lying on the ground as well, completely stunned and without any understanding of what had occurred. Pavel slowly opened his eyes, only to hear Damien's calm voice asking if he had finally woken up. He looked up in shock to see Damien standing over him, and heard him mockingly say that he was still as weak as ever. Damien then issued a clear threat, telling Pavel that if he ever caused another incident like this, he'd see something else entirely. Pavel was utterly stunned as scattered memories began returning to him. Damien calmly explained that what happened wasn't an incident. It was simply a lesson he had intended to teach the Duke's knights. Pavel slowly recalled what had happened and realized that he and his 2 comrades had indeed attacked Damien together. He remembered the moment when the 3 knights charged Damien. In that memory, Pavel saw that Damien had countered them with extreme ease, without any real effort. He knocked them down one by one. He struck Pavel directly in the face, causing him to lose consciousness. Then he sent him flying through the air. Pavel stood in complete shock, asking himself in disbelief whether Damien had truly defeated all of them that easily, while his 2 comrades behind him appeared utterly demoralized. Pavel Bermond was gripped by intense fear as he stared at Damien in utter disbelief, wondering to himself what kind of monster stood before him, especially since Damien showed no signs of fatigue or exhaustion. Damien looked calmly at Pavel and his 2 comrades, and asked clearly who was responsible for training them. Pavel, still kneeling on the ground and clearly flustered, replied that their trainer was the mid-tier knight, Sebastian Vincenzo. Damien repeated the question in surprise, confirming if their instructor was indeed Sebastian Vincenzo, and Pavel nodded quietly in response. Damien's expression turned to one of clear displeasure as he seriously questioned whether Vincenzo had truly trained them in such a poor manner. He added that if he could simply tell him to stop, he would, but he didn't want to start unnecessary conflict. Damien then told the 3 knights that once their training with Vincenzo ended each day, they were to report to the courtyard and train personally with him. Pavel hesitated, afraid of what might happen to them if they returned injured from the training, and worried about Vincenzo's reaction. But Damien reassured them clearly that it was nothing they needed to worry about. Then Damien smiled with full confidence and told them that no matter how much they got hit, he guaranteed they wouldn't suffer a single wound or scratch. Pavel was deeply shocked as he examined himself carefully, wondering how Damien had hit him earlier without leaving a single mark. Damien approached with a chilling expression and calmly explained that the reason was simply because he had learned a long time ago how to hit people in a professional and precise manner. Damien began to recall distant memories of a man known as the personal corrector, who traveled across the continent disciplining criminals and correcting their behavior. Damien explained inwardly that this man's method was very simple. He would beat the criminals for 1 full hour, and if their behavior hadn't changed after the first hour, he would double the beating duration and sometimes continue for extremely long periods. Damien continued his memories, stating that this man began to feel deep pity for the criminals who endured brutal beatings. Because of that, the man sought a way to beat them without endangering their lives. Eventually, he mastered a highly refined level of technique, later known as pretend death kill, a very advanced combat style. Damien admitted to himself that this was precisely the technique he had just used on the 3 knights. It inflicted severe pain without leaving any visible trace. He turned back to the 3 knights, telling them they should now fully understand their true level of weakness. Pavel reluctantly agreed, visibly ashamed and discouraged, admitting that they really were as weak as Damien had said. Damien then continued with a sarcastic smile, telling them not to worry too much, because they still had a full month before the anticipated duel. He assured them that in that short time, he would transform them from mere weak insects into useful insects. The 3 knights were utterly stunned by Damien's unexpected words and stared at him in complete disbelief. At that moment, someone called out to Damien clearly, telling him that he had arrived. Damien turned quietly to see the Marquis's servant approaching him quickly, causing him to wonder internally whether this man was truly the Marquis's servant. The Marquis's servant approached Damien and informed him that the Marquis was requesting to see him immediately. Damien calmly asked why the Marquis wanted him at this time. The servant quickly and clearly explained that Princess Chelsea had just returned. Princess Chelsea Goldpixie entered the palace with great confidence and a regal presence, officially announcing her return. She then went to greet the Duke, telling him that it had been a long time since they last met. She bowed to her father and told him that she had finally returned from her mission. Hovitz was visibly happy about Princess Chelsea's return. Duke Goldpixie responded to Chelsea, saying it had been a full month since she left on her mission, and asked her if she had found a suitable knight to participate in the competition. Princess Chelsea looked toward the knight and answered confidently that she had indeed found him. The low-ranking knight Guillaume Blackwing stepped forward and introduced himself with a loud voice as the Wild Beast, carrying an imposing presence. The other knights were surprised and began whispering among themselves, admitting that they knew him well as a famous free knight. The knights discussed Guillaume Blackwing's reputation, mentioning that he had participated in the conflict within the kingdom of Ecleon and had carried out a massacre against other low-ranking knights. They continued, confirming that his fame was widespread and that he had no rival among the knights of his class. Duke Goldpixie looked toward Guillaume and said he had heard quite a lot about him already. Guillaume confirmed to the Duke that his reputation had even reached the Apple Kingdom. Princess Chelsea stepped forward and informed the Duke that Sir Guillaume Blackwing had pledged his loyalty to her and had promised to take part in the upcoming duel. She smiled confidently and declared that Guillaume would certainly be able to handle Michael Leomblum well in the duel. The knights whispered among themselves, stating that based on reputation alone, it was obvious Guillaume surpassed Michael Leomblum. They added that Michael was still in the development phase, while Sir Guillaume was already a fully seasoned veteran. Duke Goldpixie agreed, saying this was indeed good news, but admitted he was getting a bit of a headache over the situation. Princess Chelsea turned to him, puzzled, asking what he meant by that. The Duke explained that he had not yet introduced the person who would represent him in the duel. Both Princess Chelsea and Guillaume looked toward the person standing at the door, and the Duke clearly announced that the one who would represent him in this duel was Damien Haxon. Princess Chelsea cast a sharp, hateful glare at Damien. Then she turned to her father, shocked, questioning what he meant by that, reminding him that she had asked him to wait until her return. The Duke replied that this was true, but he had never promised her that he would wait. Princess Chelsea objected further, saying that even now he could still change his chosen representative if he wanted. The Duke answered that he would still decide the matter. Princess Chelsea strongly voiced her disapproval, stating that she had never even heard of the name Damien Haxon before. She continued in clear frustration, asking why her father would choose an unknown knight like Damien over someone as obvious as Sir Guillaume Blackwing. Guillaume smiled upon hearing Chelsea's words about him. Damien noticed Guillaume's gaze and began to wonder internally whether this man was the one he had been anticipating. Duke Goldpixie explained to Princess Chelsea that while Sir Guillaume indeed had an impressive reputation, Damien Haxon had demonstrated his exceptional skill by successfully blocking Hovitz's attack. Princess Chelsea let out a short sigh and told her father that he always had such excellent excuses for ignoring her own capabilities. She continued, accusing him of consistently contradicting himself through his words and actions, especially toward her and her mother. The Duke cut her off sharply, warning her to watch her words in front of their guests. Chelsea quickly interrupted herself and apologized to her father, explaining that she was exhausted from travel and not in her right state of mind. From a distance, Damien observed the heated exchange between the Duke and his daughter and thought to himself that there were clearly deep-rooted tensions between them. The Duke decisively ended the conversation, telling his daughter that the matter of changing the official representative would be decided after consulting with the other officials, and ordered her to stop arguing and leave the room at once. Suddenly, Guillaume began laughing hysterically, confusing everyone present. He then addressed the Duke, saying that a man should stand by his word. Senior Knight Heinrich was visibly irritated by Guillaume's insolence. Guillaume then approached Damien and told him that he wanted to settle who the real candidate should be, through a duel between the two of them. Princess Chelsea stood up, shouting at Sir Guillaume Blackwing in agitation, demanding to know what he was doing, and reminding him clearly that she had told him to remain calm and avoid unnecessary actions. Duke Goldpixie responded coolly and calmly, saying that what Guillaume had said wasn't exactly wrong, causing Princess Chelsea to grow even more frustrated. The Duke then turned toward Damien and asked him directly for his opinion on the current situation. Damien thought quietly and clearly to himself, realizing that Duke Goldpixie was testing him again, and decided it was necessary to display some strength in order to resolve the situation. Still, Damien affirmed internally that it would be best to find a way to resolve the matter without an actual fight. He then approached Guillaume and extended his hand toward him. He declared that there were matters that needed clarification now, and suggested settling the issue with a direct test of strength. Sir Guillaume smirked mockingly and warned Damien that if his arm got dislocated during the clash, he shouldn't blame him. Damien replied with a chilling smile, saying that in that case, he'd dislocate Guillaume's shoulder instead, which greatly startled Sir Guillaume. Sir Guillaume's expression turned furious, and he clenched his teeth in clear outrage at what he had just heard. In the next moment, Sir Guillaume charged at full force and grabbed Damien's hand swiftly. But Damien easily dodged the direct attack and seized Sir Guillaume's arm in a way that completely caught him off guard. Sir Guillaume was stunned as his entire body flipped through the air due to Damien's sudden and unexpected movement. He slammed into the ground with obvious force and violence, leaving everyone in the room completely shocked by what had just happened. Senior Knight Heinrich stood, watching the scene in visible astonishment, mentally noting that Damien Haxon had done an excellent job. Heinrich began to analyze what had happened, explaining that Sir Guillaume had initially tried to grab Damien's hand. But the Duke clarified that Damien had instead used Guillaume's strength against him with impressive precision, slamming him to the ground. Heinrich added that Damien had demonstrated not only great physical power, but also truly outstanding combat technique. Sir Guillaume glared furiously at Damien, wondering to himself how Damien had dared to humiliate him like that. Damien smiled calmly and commented that Sir Guillaume was stronger than he had expected, and that he really had intended only to dislocate his shoulder. Sir Guillaume screamed furiously and raised his weapon high, preparing to fight seriously. He charged forward, consumed with anger, clearly intent on attacking Damien. Princess Chelsea screamed in panic, calling out to Sir Guillaume and begging him to stop immediately. But Sir Guillaume ignored her plea and shouted in rage that he would crush Damien's skull in a single blow. Just as he was attacking, a loud voice suddenly ordered him to stop immediately. Senior Knight Heinrich appeared, issuing a harsh threat to Sir Guillaume. Heinrich expressed deep anger at Guillaume's audacity for recklessly drawing a weapon in the presence of the Duke. He then asked in a clear and threatening tone whether Guillaume truly wished to die for what he had just done. A terrifying aura began radiating from Heinrich's body as he glared at Guillaume with intense fury. Damien was stunned and deeply impressed by the knight's fearsome aura, thinking to himself that this was the true power of a high-ranking knight. But Heinrich, in respect for Princess Chelsea's status, said calmly that he would let this incident pass once. However, he warned sternly that there would be no second chance if anything like this ever happened again. Sir Guillaume stood, panting and exhausted after the confrontation, swallowing hard as he showed clear signs of tension from what had just happened. Duke Goldpixie clapped his hands and calmly commented that what had occurred was merely a minor disturbance, nothing worth worrying about. He continued speaking and announced to everyone that it would be best for Damien to remain the duchy's official representative in the upcoming duel. Hovitz interjected with frustration, telling the Duke that the duel that had just taken place was completely unfair. Hovitz justified his point by saying that Sir Guillaume Blackwing had not yet recovered from the fatigue of travel, which meant Damien had a significant advantage. But Knight Vincenzo chimed in, saying that it also had to be acknowledged that Sir Guillaume uses weapons in combat, so his real skill couldn't be judged properly while unarmed. Princess Chelsea eagerly agreed with Knight Vincenzo and added that it was only fair to compare both knights' skills through an official duel. Duke Goldpixie angrily ordered his daughter to stop stirring up trouble. But his frustration grew, and he harshly told her to stop displaying such incompetence in front of everyone. Princess Chelsea felt deeply embarrassed and humiliated. She quietly admitted that she had indeed behaved rudely. Damien stepped forward and addressed her gently, saying, "Your Highness the Princess," in an attempt to calm her and ease the tense situation. He raised his hand quietly and politely asked if he might say something. Everyone turned toward him, wondering what he intended to say in that moment. After the meeting ended, Victor asked Damien why he had agreed to fight that duel. He felt there had been no need for it. Damien replied that there is always a reason for everything. Damien noticed the workshop the Duke had mentioned earlier and wondered if this was the place he had referred to. Victor confirmed that it was indeed the workshop the Duke had meant. Damien recalled Duke Goldpixie's words, who had told him earlier that his sword had been broken during the duel with Hovitz, and so he had ordered the duchy's blacksmith to forge a new blade specially for him. Damien thought to himself that an ordinary person might believe a basic training sword would suffice, but this particular sword commissioned by the Duke was not something one could acquire easily, even within the duchy itself. Damien and Victor entered the workshop, and one of the blacksmiths was surprised to see them. The blacksmith explained that he had already been informed of their arrival. He asked Damien and Victor to follow him inside the workshop so he could show them the sword that had been forged. Damien was greatly surprised by the amount of high-quality weapons inside the workshop and mentioned this to Victor. Suddenly, Damien's attention was drawn to a very distinctive sword among the displayed weapons. He wondered internally whether this was the sword that had been specially prepared for him by the Duke. The blacksmith noticed Damien's interest in that sword and asked if he was interested in it, since it truly did have a unique design. The blacksmith began explaining the story behind the sword, saying that the knight who commissioned it had said he would give it a specific name before disappearing. Damien then suggested that it might have been a special order blade, leaving the blacksmith surprised by how Damien could possibly know that. Damien said to himself that the sword resembled one used long ago by a man known as the Evil Swordmaster. Damien then decided that he would take this sword. The blacksmith was surprised by Damien's choice, especially knowing the unusual materials from which it had been forged. Damien continued his inner thoughts, saying that this sword was different from other rare swords because it had the ability to amplify magic. He then asked the blacksmith if the sword had a name. The blacksmith tried to recall the name, saying that the knight who ordered it had wanted to call it the Sword of 1,000 Miles. Damien stood before the distinctive sword and declared that he would name it the Sword of 1,000 Miles. The blacksmith asked him respectfully whether he had truly found a weapon he liked, while Damien stood staring at the sword in his hand with great interest. Suddenly, a young maid entered the workshop and politely introduced herself to Damien, telling him her name was Rebecca and that she served Princess Chelsea. Rebecca stood with obvious courtesy and reiterated that she was there to escort Damien to where the princess wished to meet him. She calmly explained that Princess Chelsea wanted to meet him personally and asked whether he had time to see her. Damien responded coolly that he didn't think he had much to discuss with the princess. Rebecca smiled gently and said that nothing was certain yet, implying that Princess Chelsea might have more depth than she seemed. She continued, indirectly suggesting that the princess's intent was to persuade Damien of something, and that it would be better for him to comply rather than refuse. Damien quietly agreed to Rebecca's request and asked her to lead the way to the meeting place. Rebecca walked with Damien through the palace corridors and gardens. She explained to him that the place they were heading to was a restaurant personally managed by Princess Chelsea, a private, reservation-only venue exclusive to nobles. Rebecca added that the restaurant had been fully cleared out for the day specifically for Damien's visit. She pointed toward the restaurant and told Damien that the princess was already waiting for him inside. Damien quietly responded that he understood and told Rebecca he would enter immediately. He stood at the restaurant door, wondering to himself what kind of proposal Princess Chelsea might present to him. Suddenly, Damien noticed a strange and distinct scent wafting from inside the place. Upon entering, Princess Chelsea greeted him calmly, telling him that he was a little late for their meeting. She sat at the table inside and asked Damien to come quickly and sit with her. Princess Chelsea smiled mysteriously as she addressed him by name, Damien Haxon, while exuding great confidence. Damien asked her directly why she had summoned him here in private. She answered with complete composure, saying that he seemed to be in a hurry, and suggested they speak while enjoying dinner. which would be served shortly. But Damien declined the wait and told her plainly that he didn't wish to waste his time on idle conversation and asked her to state what she wanted immediately. Princess Chelsea accepted his request and told him clearly that she had only one thing to ask. She continued asking Damien to step down from his position as the official representative of House Goldpixie in the upcoming duel. Damien asked her whether she didn't trust Sir Guillaume. She replied that he shouldn't misunderstand her. Someone like Sir Guillaume, if wielding his axe, could make someone like Damien utterly insignificant. She continued, saying that her intention was to preserve all of their strength for the duel against the Marquis. That was why she was asking him to step down. Chelsea explained that she didn't want to risk any losses or even minor injuries from a pointless skirmish, and told him that if he resigned as representative, she would grant him anything he desired in return. Damien asked what reason he would have to yield to her demand. Princess Chelsea smiled confidently and told him that nobles like him, poor nobles, usually had very obvious desires. Damien asked her directly whether she truly knew what he wanted. She continued speaking, saying that poor nobles usually desired things like wealth, fame, and similar ambitions. Damien felt a surge of anger internally at her arrogant tone, noting to himself how presumptuous it was for her to judge others so superficially. Princess Chelsea continued, stating that Duke Goldpixie could offer Damien all of those things, far better than Marquis Leonblum ever could. She told him it would be wiser to side with the true and future Duke. She ended her statement with a smile, telling Damien that if he had understood her well, he should go to her father immediately and inform him of his resignation from the role of official representative of the duchy. At that moment, a dark and ominous aura began to emanate from Princess Chelsea, making the atmosphere extremely tense. A heavy silence fell as Damien stood completely calm, staring straight ahead without saying a single word. He then clearly and firmly rejected the offer that had been made to him. Princess Chelsea was visibly stunned by Damien's unexpected refusal, and she shouted in disbelief, saying this couldn't be real. Damien smiled inwardly and told himself he understood perfectly well why Princess Chelsea was now anxious, because he hadn't fallen under the effect of the enchanted perfume she was using. He recalled that the enchanted perfume was a potent form of dark magic, typically used to control the will of others by inducing a false sense of attraction. From his past life's knowledge, he had recognized the presence of that enchanted scent the moment he entered the room. He noted in his thoughts that any ordinary person would become a completely obedient slave within just 1 hour of breathing in that dense, magical aroma. But Damien affirmed to himself that his unique ability, Authority of Greed, had completely absorbed the effects of the dark magic, rendering the perfume entirely useless on him. As Princess Chelsea sat there stunned, Damien asked her what exactly she meant when she said, "This can't be happening." Chelsea shouted angrily, demanding to know why he would reject her offer, insisting she had already promised to give him everything he desired. Damien answered with total calm, saying that he didn't need anything from her, and explained that what he truly wanted was something she could never give. Chelsea was shocked by his words and shouted in anger, asking what exactly he meant. What was it that he wanted? Damien smiled quietly and told her that the thing he truly desired was the happiness of his family. Chelsea was once again surprised by his completely unexpected response and asked in deep confusion, "What do you mean?" Damien decided to leave quietly and told Princess Chelsea to inform Sir Guillaume Blackwing to prepare well for the upcoming duel. Princess Chelsea's expression changed, becoming cold and serious. She told Damien calmly that it seemed he valued his family far too highly. Then she began to speak in a clearly threatening tone, warning Damien that if he did not resign as the duchy's representative, she would send people to wipe out the Haxon household entirely. She went on to make her threat clear. She would send men to trample House Haxon mercilessly. But in the very next moment, Princess Chelsea was stunned, as Damien suddenly lunged toward her with incredible speed. He grabbed Princess Chelsea by the throat with immense force, causing her to collapse to the ground, paralyzed and screaming in pain. She screamed in fury, shouting at Damien, demanding how he dared lay hands on her body in such a way. Damien didn't reply. He simply stood over her, his expression full of rage, tightening his grip on her neck. Chelsea began to scream loudly in pain, gasping as she choked under his grip, the pain overwhelming her. At that moment, her knights rushed in quickly after hearing the loud noise, calling out in panic for Princess Chelsea. The knights were horrified and furious, shouting at Damien, demanding how he dared lay a hand on her highness. One of the knights quickly tried to rush toward the princess to pull her from Damien's grasp. In the next moment, Damien moved with terrifying speed, launching an attack against the knights and effortlessly dodging all of their attempts to reach him. The knights were stunned by Damien's immense power and incredible speed, completely unable to keep up or stop him. They were left shocked and terrified, falling to the ground one after another after Damien's lightning-fast counterattack. Damien looked coldly at Princess Chelsea and told her with chilling calm that, in truth, he wanted to cut off her head right now. But he would refrain, because, in his opinion, that would be far too merciful a punishment for her. Damien approached Princess Chelsea and told her in a clearly threatening tone that she should properly prepare herself for the horrific fate awaiting her. He turned his head slightly and smiled with terrifying confidence as he indirectly hinted at the dreadful future that was drawing near for her. Princess Chelsea trembled where she sat on the ground, her face showing unmistakable signs of sheer terror at Damien's words. At that moment, Rebecca, the maid, suddenly entered the room and was deeply shocked by what she saw. She ran quickly toward Princess Chelsea and asked her with great concern whether she was all right. Princess Chelsea was filled with overwhelming fury and muttered through clenched teeth that she would definitely kill Damien Haxon this time, without fail. Then she screamed in rage, calling out for someone named Mustang. Mustang appeared immediately and loudly declared his presence upon being summoned by the princess. The princess began speaking furiously, demanding to know why the enchanted perfume had failed to work on Damien. Mustang responded with visible hesitation, saying he didn't know the exact reason, but explained that some individuals possessed a natural resistance to dark magic. But Princess Chelsea only grew angrier and screamed at him as she hit him hard, calling him an idiot, which made him cry out in pain. She then asked harshly where Sir Guillaume Blackwing was at the moment. Mustang answered nervously that Guillaume had gone to a tavern to drink, saying he needed a drink to calm his anger over what had happened today. Princess Chelsea screamed furiously, demanding to know how Guillaume could be in a tavern when he had such an important duel the next day. She approached Mustang and screamed in his face, asking if he was really certain that Sir Guillaume Blackwing could defeat Damien Haxon. Mustang responded confidently, assuring her that Sir Guillaume was the best they had, and that he had never seen a knight more skilled in dark magic. Mustang then urged Princess Chelsea to be patient, promising her that they would definitely place the entire ducal estate under her control. Chelsea glared at him with unmistakable anger and threatened him harshly, saying that he'd better keep his promise, or he would be the first to die. Mustang became extremely flustered by the princess's threat and kept repeating nervously that he would remember her words clearly. Meanwhile, Damien stood high above, watching the entire scene unfold below with a remarkably calm and focused expression.